Chapter 507. Go to watch net. As soon as Xinyan and the others left, Li Yundong keenly felt that the atmosphere in the field had changed significantly. All kinds of suspicion, fear, awe, and admiration were surging toward Li Yundong like a flood. Go to watch net. For a moment, no one spoke. The cultivators of all sects were afraid that Li Yundong would say that he wanted to continue to fight, but because of Li Yundong's previous help, no one was willing to stand up and be the villain. After thinking about it for a moment, Li Yundong figured out the key to it. He smiled slightly and cupped his hands to Wang Jinyuan, who was beside him. Master Wan, since the Japanese have left, let's continue with the Taoist assembly. Please continue to fight. I'll just watch from the side. When Wang Jinyuan saw that Li Yundong had taken the initiative to ask to fight, his evaluation of Li Yundong immediately increased. He said with some admiration, "Zhenren Li, aren't you going to fight?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Since I've already said that I won't fight, I naturally can't fight again. No matter what happens, there can be no exception. Moreover, defeating the Japanese is a matter of justice for cultivators. This is a public matter, while what we decided at the Taoist assembly is a private matter. As a person, we can't abandon the public for private reasons, nor can we abandon the public for private reasons." Wang Jinyuan couldn't help but form a palm with one hand and salute Li Yundong. He praised, "Amitabha. Zhenren Li is young and promising. Not only are you good at fighting, but your cultivation is also amazing. What's more, you are broad-minded and elegant. I admire you." Li Yundong smiled slightly and returned the salute. "Master Wan, you're too polite." After that, he walked down the stage slowly. Li Yundong walked to his seat and saw that Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others were all smiling brightly, as if they were welcoming a victorious general. Su Chan even gave him a thumbs up with a smile and said with a smile, "Yundong, you're so powerful. It's a pity that the immortal pen is gone." Guan Hongling also sighed and said, "Yes, these unscrupulous guys forget morality at the sight of profit and repay kindness with enmity. Without Li Yundong, they wouldn't have been able to raise their heads in the future. Now you still have selfish thoughts and want to get the immortal pen. Humph, who do you think you are?" Li Yundong smiled disapprovingly and said, "You can't say that. Me taking the immortal pen is just the icing on the cake. They taking the immortal pen is a timely help. Moreover, the reason why I stood up was for Ziyuan's sake and for the sake of our Chinese cultivation world. It's not for this immortal pen. You can't be mistaken about this." Ziyuan also nodded and said with admiration, "Li Yundong has handled this matter very well. He is generous and has the demeanor of a great cultivator." Guan Hongling blinked, glanced at Ziyuan, and then at Li Yundong. She covered her mouth and said with a smile, "Well, you only know how to speak up for him. Fine, fine, I'm the villain, okay?" Ziyuan glared at Guan Hongling and scolded with a blushing face, "Shut up." Guan Hongling immediately cried out in grievance, "I didn't say anything. Can't I say that I'm the villain?" Ziyuan was so ashamed and angry that she stepped on Guan Hongling under the table. Guan Hongling immediately cried out and shouted, "Someone stepped on me. Li Yundong, you have to uphold justice." Li Yundong coughed dryly and said, "Keep your voice down. Everyone is watching." Guan Hongling quickly glanced around. Sure enough, she saw all kinds of eyes looking at them. Guan Hongling then changed her expression and said to Li Yundong in a low voice, "Hey, there's nothing to see next, right? Why don't we leave?" Zhou Qin also whispered, "Yes, master, we've watched so many battles. I don't think there will be any high-level battles next. Why don't we leave? I feel that there's something wrong with the way these people are looking at us. It's weird." Li Yundong looked around, thought for a moment, and said, "Well, since you all say so, let's go back." As he said this, he was about to stand up, but he saw Wang Jinyuan sigh to the crowd and say, "Fellow Taoists, I, Wang Jinyuan, would like to apologize to you for what happened. If I hadn't asked these Japanese to come up, such a thing wouldn't have happened." Although the cultivators of the various sects agreed with him, they all said, "Master Wan, you can't say that. It's these Japanese who came uninvited. If we force them out, maybe these Japanese will say that our Chinese cultivation world is not magnanimous and can't tolerate them." "Yes, Master Wan, this is not your fault. You don't have to blame yourself." Wang Jinyuan laughed and said, Thank you for your magnanimity, but I am more or less responsible for this matter. It's not right if I don't apologize. Everyone also laughed, and Dang Chong also joined in and joked, Sect Master Wan, since you feel ashamed, then hurry up and ask the little girl who sang just now to sing 2 more songs for us. Everyone burst into laughter and clamored, that's right, Sect Leader Wan, let that chick sing 2 more songs. Wan Jinyuan laughed and saw that the little girl who had sung before was standing timidly in the corner near the back door with a pipa in her arms. Like a frightened deer, she looked at the cultivators on the field vigilantly and nervously. Wan Jinyuan waved at her with a smile and said, Xiao Qiao, come here. Everyone is waiting for you to sing Ping Tan. The girl named Xiao Qiao walked over timidly with the pipa in her arms. She glanced at the crowd with her watery eyes and then lowered them in panic, like a mimosa. Dang Chong laughed and said, Xiao Qiao? Are you Xiao Qiao from Copper Sparrow Spring? Wan Jinyuan smiled and said to Xiao Qiao, would you like to introduce yourself to the seniors of all sects? Xiao Qiao lowered her head and stared at her shoes. She didn't dare to raise her head. She said in a crisp voice, my name is Song Yu Qiao, and I'm Qiao from Copper Sparrow Spring, not Qiao from Copper Sparrow Spring. When the cultivators of all sects heard her speak, their clear and delicate voice made them feel as if they had eaten a ginseng fruit. There was a refreshing feeling in their pores. Dang Chong pointed at Song Yu Qiao and said with a smile, little girl, you weren't shy just now. Why are you so shy now? Song Yu Qiao's whole body trembled almost imperceptibly. She looked up at the crowd and immediately lowered her head even more. Everyone burst into laughter. Although Wan Jinyuan felt a little strange, he still smiled and tried to smooth things over for Song Yu Qiao. He said, this is a new outer disciple of our Gazao sect. She may not have seen much of the world, so she may have been a little afraid when she saw you fighting just now. So please don't be offended. Everyone laughed and said, it's not strange at all. It's already very good that she can immediately sing Ping Tan after seeing such a frightening fight just now. Some cultivators laughed loudly and said, Master Wan, let me have your disciple. Wan Jinyuan looked at the person who had spoken with a smile and said, are you looking for a disciple or a wife? Everyone laughed, and Song Yu Qiao was so shy that her face turned red. Wan Jinyuan smiled and said, everyone, please let this little disciple of mine go. Besides, if you want to listen to a song, let her sing. We don't need to be long-winded. Everyone agreed in unison. Dang Chong touched his bald head and said to Song Yu Qiao with a smile, Xiao Qiao, what are you singing? Song Yu Qiao whispered, it depends on what you want to hear. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito. If it weren't for the fact that everyone present was a good cultivator, they probably wouldn't have been able to hear her at all. Wan Jinyuan's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly said to the crowd, everyone, just now, Zhenrenli showed his divine power and drove away these arrogant Japanese. We haven't thanked him yet. Why don't we ask Zhenrenli to choose a song as our thanks? Everyone immediately said in unison, that's a good idea. Wan Jinyuan said to Li Yundong with a smile, Zhenrenli, don't stand on ceremony. Just choose one. Li Yundong saw that everyone was looking at him, so he didn't stand on ceremony. He smiled slightly and said, well, what are you best at? When Song Yu Qiao heard Li Yundong's gentle voice, it was as if a warm current had flowed into her heart, making her involuntarily want to trust him. She boldly raised her head and looked at him, only to see that the man who had been like a god in the fight was smiling at her. His eyes were as approachable as the sunshine in April. Song Yu Qiao couldn't help but feel a little curious. She thought to herself, Master said that Li Yundong is the best person in the world who helps a villain do evil. He is lustful, violent, and arrogant. But why do I feel that he is a daring, responsible, loyal, and skilled man? Could it be that Master was wrong? No, Master couldn't have been wrong. Maybe I was wrong. Song Yu Qiao stared at Li Yundong in a daze and forgot to reply for a moment. When everyone saw this, they laughed and said, Master Wan, your little disciple is in love. Song Yu Qiao suddenly came to her senses after being teased by them. She was so shy that her ears seemed to be dripping blood. She whispered, the legend of the white snake is what I'm best at. When Li Yundong heard this, he thought to himself, why is this girl singing songs about subduing demons? He didn't take it to heart, so he said with a smile, well, you can sing this. Song Yu Qiao didn't dare to look at Li Yundong again. She held the pipa and bowed to everyone, then sat down. At this time, a Pingtan woman with a Sanxian in her arms came out from the back door and sat down beside her. Seeing that everyone's attention was focused on the two of them, Wang Jinyuan smiled slightly, turned around, and walked out of the back door. As soon as he went out, he turned a corner, walked through 2 long corridors, and came to a classical wooden house. He pushed the door open, and walked in. As soon as Wang Jinyuan entered the door, he saw a tall man leaning against the window, his eyes fixed on the outside, as if he was looking at the singing building in the distance. After a while, a small paper crane flew into his hand. Wang Jinyuan asked in a deep voice, "Did you see it?" The man nodded slightly and didn't turn around. His figure was like a silent mountain, giving people a strong sense of pressure. Wang Jinyuan snorted coldly and said, "Are you sure you can control such a person? Can you imagine how powerful and terrifying a cultivator who can dispel Mahamayuri in a fight is?" The man was silent for a long time, then sighed softly. From the day he set foot on the Qinghai Tibet plateau, I could vaguely feel that his future was limitless, but I still underestimated him. Wang Jinyuan asked, "Are you sure you want to continue with your plan?" The man didn't comment. He said in a deep voice, "The arrow is on the bowstring, and it has to be shot. Don't worry, I have a way." Wang Jinyuan looked at the man's back with uncertain eyes and said slowly, "You'd better be sure. Otherwise, if you fail, I will fall out with you." With that, he snorted and turned to leave. Only this person was left in the room, looking at the small paper crane in his hand with a smile. With a shake of his palm, the small paper crane flew up with a whoosh and flew in the direction of the melodious sound of Pingtan. The man's lips curled into a meaningful smile. The show has just begun. 8. Yeah. Chapter 508. Go to watch net. After Li Yundong selected The Legend of the White Snake, he turned to Su Chan and the others and said with a smile, "She asked me to select a song. I can't just leave, can I? At least listen to it." Zi Yuan smiled and said, "Well, it's rare to see such a high-level Pingtan. Go to watch net." 7K. Oath M. This girl may have been in primary school, and I don't know which famous teacher she studied under. Zhou Qin asked curiously, "Why did she join the Gazao sect?" Zi Yuan smiled and said, "Now all the sects are secretly expanding their strength. Zhangyi School is busy gathering the branches of the sect, and Chuanjin Dragon sect is busy collecting the ancient books and Taoist magic that have been scattered in the cultivation world. As for the Gazao sect, it is desperately making money and then trying its best to develop its believers. Although there aren't many masters from the Gazao sect in this year's Taoist assembly, in the cultivation world, the Gazao sect is the richest, and they also have the most external disciples. They can be said to be full of talents." Su Chan couldn't help but sigh. "Yundong, when will we be able to sell medicine? How nice it would be to make money and buy such a big garden." Li Yundong pretended to be angry and glared at her. He scratched the tip of her nose with his fingertip and scolded her in a low voice. "You wicked girl, you are too greedy. We used to live in a small rental house, and we were happy, weren't we? Later, we lived in a big house with 3 bedrooms and 2 living rooms. Weren't you all so very happy? Later on, it was changed to a large compound house. But now, you little girl, you're eyeing this kind of small garden. Do you think I run a bank?" Su Chan grabbed Li Yundong's arm and said with a coquettish smile, "I was just saying. As long as I'm with you, I'll be happy even if I have to live on the streets. If I can't be with you, even if I live in the palace, it will be like a year for me." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He tapped the tip of the little girl's crystal pink nose and said with a smile, "You're good at talking. But no matter how useless I am, I won't let you live on the streets, will I?" Su Chan nodded hard with a smile and said, "Of course. My Yundong is a great hero." Li Yundong couldn't help but recall that when the two of them were at their lowest point, Su Chan had loudly declared to the landlord and Rongguafa that she would definitely become a great hero in the future. Thinking back to the scene at that time, and then thinking back to the scene in front of him, Li Yundong really felt like a lifetime had passed. He chuckled and lovingly stroked the little girl's hair. "Silly girl, what kind of hero am I?" Su Chan said with a serious face. "Why isn't he a hero? No one here was a match for the Japanese. You were the only one who drove them away, bringing glory to the Chinese cultivation world. What else could you be if not a hero?" Zhou Qin also nodded and looked at him with admiration, saying, "That's right. If it weren't for you, Master, who turned the tide, I'm afraid we would have lost face this time." Li Yundong shook his head and said with a smile, "It's just a coincidence. There are countless masters in the divine land. Even if we lose today, we can win tomorrow." The Japanese cultivation world is blessed by nature and has a quiet and stable cultivation environment. Especially this time, they came prepared, so they caught all the sects by surprise. But after all, their population is small and their territory is small. Moreover, their cultivation world originated in the Tang dynasty, while our cultivation world can be traced back to the time of Peng Zhu and Laozi, which is 1 or 2,000 years earlier than them. Li Yundong said with a sigh, "Although our cultivation world has suffered all kinds of blows and has declined so far, after all, it has been passed down for thousands of years. As the saying goes, a skinny camel is still bigger than a horse." In terms of a deep foundation and a large number of talents, the Japanese cultivation world is far from being comparable to us. They can win for a while, but they can't win for a lifetime. Zi Yuan also nodded and said, "That's right. As far as I know, most of the masters of the Xueqi school this time are masters of the younger generation. The only one who can represent the older generation is Zhang Ling. And Zhang Ling's magic must be earth-shattering. If she had fought just now, she might not have lost to Tachibana Wakako. However, in such a busy city, she couldn't use 10% of her ability, so she was very worried and didn't go on stage. Moreover, not only the Xueqi school, but the older generation of cultivators of the Chuanjian Dragon sect, Qingqing sect, Jinshan sect, and other sects are also very powerful. It's just that most of them cultivate in seclusion and hardly walk in the world." Li Yundong nodded and said with a smile, "A centipede is dead but not stiff. What's more, the cultivation world can be said to be full of talents now. I believe that it won't be long before there will be a few great cultivators." When Li Yundong said this, he looked at Zhou Qin. It was obvious that he was encouraging and appreciating her. Zhou Qin's heart warmed up and she nodded vigorously. Guan Hongling, who was beside her, said with a smile, "Li Yundong, you even praised yourself, didn't you? After this Taoist assembly, you can also be regarded as a great cultivator, right? Shiji Zi Yuan, don't you think so?" Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, "In terms of fighting strength and reputation, Li Yundong can indeed be called a great cultivator." Li Yundong waved his hand and said with a smile, "Don't flatter me. I haven't even cultivated to the Jinshin phase. How dare I call myself a great cultivator? Those who have cultivated to the Jinshin phase have young spirits that are truly indestructible. No magical weapon in the world can kill them. Only such cultivators can be called great cultivators. I'm still far from that." Su Chan said seriously, "Yundong, you will definitely become a great cultivator, and your speed will be very fast. Think about how long you've been cultivating, and now you're already so powerful." Li Yundong smiled and said, "To cultivate to the Jinshin phase, one must have the help of Dun Jindan. Without a great opportunity, one can't cultivate." While they were talking, they saw that Song Yuqiao had already tuned the strings. She coughed softly, cleared her throat, and then began to sing softly. As soon as everyone heard her speak, they immediately quieted down. For a moment, there was no sound in the small building. Everyone looked at Song Yuqiao with bright eyes and held their breath. Song Yuqiao's 5 fingers were gently twisted, and her diamond-shaped red lips were gently opened and closed. She sang in a soft and beautiful voice, "The West Lake is here again today, and the past is painful to think about. Through ups and downs, we cross the boat together, and we see the sincerity of Su Hanwen. It's rare for an official to have such good feelings, and to respect and pity each other is a blind date. Who would have thought that good flowers would meet merciless rain, and the bright moon would meet thousands of miles of clouds? Now the flowers have fallen, and the moon is not clear. I can't bear to look back on the old feelings. I only hate Monk Fa Hai, who is a monk who meddles in other people's affairs and breaks up the lovers." Song Yuqiao's voice was soft but crisp, charming but clear, especially when she was shy and speechless before. But when she sang Pingtan, she suddenly forgot all her shyness. Her expression was sad, and her eyes were sad and moving. Even those who didn't understand the lyrics could instantly get into the mood of the lyrics and music. Li Yundong saw that Song Yuqiao was singing an excerpt from the legend of the White Snake. He couldn't help laughing and said, "What a coincidence. I have Fa Hai's burning thumb pot in my hand. It must have been this burning thumb pot that dealt with the White Snake that year." Now that it's in my hands, who do you think I'll deal with? Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong and said with a smile, anyway, don't deal with me. Li Yundong laughed and moved closer to Su Chan. Little girl, if you don't listen to me, I'll teach you a lesson, he said in a low voice. Su Chan's ears turned red. She giggled and said, you're so annoying. The two of them were talking intimately as if there was no one else around. Song Yuqiao had already finished singing the play. At this time, the people upstairs were cheering loudly. There were also cultivators who shouted, it's good, but it's a little too miserable. Sing something cheerful. After Song Yuqiao finished singing, she became extremely shy again. She lowered her head and said softly, then wait for me to go in and change before I come out. As she spoke, she walked towards the back door with light steps. Everyone laughed and said, this little girl is not young, but she's quite arrogant. She wants to go in and change her clothes after singing a cheerful song. After a while, Song Yuqiao came out from the back. Everyone saw that she hadn't changed her table much. She was just wearing a pair of gold hairpin jewelry on her head. The gold hairpin was strung with a bright flower. The flower was colorful. There were all kinds of colors. It looked bright and dazzling. She walked over gracefully, and there was a fragrance on her body, which was intoxicating. Song Yuqiao sat down with the pipa in her arms. After a while she said, everyone wants to listen to a cheerful song, but I have only learned a cheerful song. Moreover, the master who taught me to sing once told me that if I wanted to sing this song, I had to worship her first before I could sing it. The cultivation world respected teachers the most. When everyone heard this, they were all in awe and said one after another, good, filial disciple. It's rare. It's really rare. After Song Yuqiao got up, she said to Wan Zhenyuan apologetically, Master Wan, I'm really sorry. Can I go burn some incense? Wan Zhenyuan had never heard Song Yuqiao mention this rule before. Although he felt it was strange, he didn't take it to heart. He smiled and said, of course. Song Yuqiao got up again, walked to the back hall, and came in with an incense burner in both hands. Everyone saw that there were 3 sticks of incense on the incense burner. Green smoke curled up, and the fragrance was pleasant. Song Yuqiao bowed to the incense burner, then sat back in her seat. She gently plucked the strings of the zither with her fingers and began to sing softly again. The clouds think of clothes, the flowers think of beauty, the spring breeze brushes the railings, and the dew is thick. If we don't meet at the top of the Jade Mountain, we will meet under the moon at the Yao Tai. A branch of red dew condenses the fragrance, and the Wushan Mountain is broken in vain. Who in the Han Palace looks like it? Pitiful swallows rely on new makeup. Famous flowers fall in love with each other, and the emperor looks at them with a smile. Explaining the infinite hatred of the spring breeze, the Agarwood pavilion leans north to dry. Li Jiandong listened to her sad singing, like a resentful woman in her boudoir. Where was the slightest joy? He couldn't help but ask curiously, what kind of song is this? Why doesn't it sound cheerful at all? Zi Yuan's face was also full of doubts. She said, this is Ying worships to the moon. It's strange. This song is very sad. How is it cheerful? Not only did Li Jiandong and Zi Yuan feel strange, but the cultivators of all the sects upstairs also felt very strange. They all said, hey, such a sad song, how is it cheerful? Little girl, did you sing wrong? Wan Zhenyuan couldn't help frowning and saying, Xiao, what are you singing? Song Yuqiao lowered her head and did not speak, but a cold woman's voice suddenly came from not far away. Aren't you happy? But I feel very cheerful. Everyone looked up and saw a beautiful and coquettish woman standing at the back door, looking at them with a sneer on her face. As soon as Li Jiandong, Su Chan, and the others saw this woman, they were shocked. Su Chan said in surprise, isn't this Shebua Zhuang Yiting? Why is she here? My cousin and his niece came home today. Sorry, the update is late. There should be one more chapter, but don't wait, it will be very late. Vote recommendation, previous page. Next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 509. Go to watch net. They all looked surprised. Go to watch net. But soon, they came to their senses. There was a cold and sarcastic smile on Zhuang Yuting's face, which made their hearts skip a beat. They thought to themselves, no, what's wrong with Sherbua Zhuang Yuting? When the little fox's eyes met Zhuang Yuting's, they immediately screamed in their hearts. No, this is not Sherbua Zhuang Yuting. Zhuang Yuting's eyes were full of hatred, as if she wanted to cut everyone in the Fox Zen school into pieces. The little foxes looked at Zhuang Yuting in horror. They had vaguely guessed what was going on, but no one dared to say it out loud. At this time, the cultivators of the various sects upstairs had no idea what had happened in the Fox Zen school. Some of them didn't know Zhuang Yuting, so they frowned and scolded. Who are you? What are you doing here? Some cultivators who had gone to Mount Tianlong to participate in the siege of the Fox Zen school recognized Zhuang Yuting at a glance. They shouted at Li Yundong, Zhenren Li, how do you discipline your subordinates? Li Yundong looked at Zhuang Yuting with a cold face and said in a cold voice, she is not my subordinate, nor is she a member of the Fox Zen school. The people who had spoken were stunned and didn't understand what Li Yundong meant. Wan Jinyuan frowned and said to Zhuang Yuting, you should be Zhenren Zhuang of the Fox Zen school, right? Today, for the sake of Zhenren Li, I won't argue with you. Please sit down on the sidelines. Zhuang Yuting laughed and said, Wan Jinyun, what right do you have to yell at me? I beat you up on Mount Gazao and you couldn't even raise your head. Have you forgotten? Wan Jinyuan's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly opened his eyes wide and said in surprise, you are Yan Fong? When the crowd heard this, there was an uproar. Yan Fong? Yan Fong of the Linggong sect. It can't be. There were also some young cultivators who didn't know Yan Fong's reputation. They quickly asked, who is Yan Fong? Is she very powerful? Immediately, an old and experienced cultivator said, hey boy, listen carefully. Yan Fong was a famous female cultivator in the past. Before Yan Fong disappeared, she had always been known as the #1 master among female cultivators and also the #1 beauty. It wasn't until she suddenly disappeared one day that the title of the #1 female cultivator in the world slowly fell to Zi Yuan. Then why did Yan Fong suddenly disappear? Hey, Yan Fong is so arrogant that she doesn't like any man in the world. She only has a crush on her Xixiang Wang Yuanshan, but her Xixiang Wang Yuanshan fell in love with Ao Wushuang of the Fox Zen school in the end. As a result, in a fit of anger, Yan Fong exposed their relationship to Celestial Master Zhang, the head of the Zhengyi school, and forced Wang Yuanshan to leave Ao Wushuang with the powerful power of the sect. Yan Fong originally thought that she could save her love this way, but the result was exactly the opposite. Wang Yuanshan would rather choose immortalization than her. Yan Fong is so powerful and is known as the #1 beauty. Why didn't Wang Yuanshan choose her? Why did he choose a vixen? Qu'est-ce, kid, you don't understand. Look at those vixens next to her. Which one of them isn't a stunner? Qu'est-ce, if a man can have a companion, he will be as happy as a god. The feeling is really indescribable. Martial uncle, the way you speak is so lewd. Ahem, cut the crap. Yan Fong saw that Wang Yuanshan refused to turn back, so she thought that it was all because the vixen of the Fox Zen school had used a hypnosis method to charm her Xixiang and steal her marriage. Therefore, Yan Fong sneaked into the Fox Zen school in anger and hid for 9 years. A while ago, she suddenly appeared on Mount Tianlong. I see. It turns out that it was this Yan Fong. Was she the one who planned the siege of Mount Tianlong last time? Yes. She is worth teaching. If it weren't for Li Yundong, I'm afraid that the Fox Zen school would have been destroyed at that time. This Yan Fong is so vicious. In order to take revenge, she hid for 9 years and wanted to destroy the whole school. Haven't you heard of the saying that a woman's heart is the most vicious? Hey, this is the internal strife of the Fox Zen school. Let's watch the show. Well, watch the show. For a moment, everyone was talking about it. Those who knew Yan Fong greeted her loudly, but Yan Fong acted as if she didn't hear them. She just stared at Li Yundong. Zhang Ling, who had fought fiercely with Yan Fong on Mount Gazao last time, also had a strange light in her eyes. She looked at the woman in front of her, who was determined to destroy the Fox Zen school, in surprise and doubt. Zhou Ping whispered to Zhang Ling, Master, there is internal strife in the Fox Zen school. Yan Fong is a member of our Zhengyi school. Should we intervene later? Zhang Ling shouted in a low voice, Shut up. Yan Feng is a scheming woman. Since she dares to show up now, it means that she already has a backup plan and a perfect plan. Right now, it's best for us to wait and see. Li Yundong looked at Zhuang Yiting in shock and said, "So you are Yan Feng?" Yan Feng laughed and said, "That's right." Li Yundong, you didn't expect this, did you? Li Yundong said in a cold voice. "What about Xueqi? What did you do to her?" Yan Feng snorted coldly and said, "You'd better take care of yourself first." Du Fei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect was very clear about the hatred between Yan Feng and the Fox Zen school. He stood up and said to Yan Feng, "Zhenren Yan, as the saying goes, it's better to get rid of enmity than to keep it alive. The grudges between you and the Fox Zen school have accumulated to this day, and both sides have suffered heavy losses. The Linggong sect is now in a state of decline, and Zhenren Zi Yuan can't support it alone. The Fox Zen school has been forced to leave their hometown, and countless people have died or been injured. Isn't it enough for you to take revenge to this extent? Why don't you stop?" Yan Feng suddenly turned her head and glared at Du Fei. She scolded him sternly, "Du Fei, what did you get from Li Yundong? Why are you speaking up for him like this?" Du Fei said unhappily, "Zhenren Yan, I think you are blinded by a leaf and cannot see Mount Tai. Your eyes have been completely blinded by hatred. Zhenren Li is open and aboveboard, selfless, generous, and elegant. I have never seen such a person in my life. And you, Zhenren Yan, are also one of the weirdos in our cultivation world. I just want to preserve a little more vitality for our cultivation world, so I said something fair. What you said is an insult to me." Yan Feng stared at Du Fei coldly. She suddenly laughed and said, "You idiot, you've been deceived by him and you still don't know it. Besides, do you really think that I just want revenge? You underestimate me." Du Fei frowned and said, "Then why are you doing this, Zhenren Yan?" Yan Feng suddenly pointed at Li Yundong and said loudly, "Fellow Taoists, today I'll let you know the true face of Li Yundong." When Zhou Qin saw Yan Feng pointing at Li Yundong and scolding him loudly, she was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She gritted her teeth, and her eyes were full of anger and hatred. In her opinion, anyone who offended Li Yundong was her enemy. She secretly vowed in her heart that she would make Yan Feng pay the price. Su Chan and the little foxes were also shocked and angry. They didn't know what kind of conspiracy Yan Feng had this time, nor did they know what kind of price they would have to pay this time. Li Yundong looked at Yan Feng coldly and said in a deep voice, "Yan Feng, if you have something to say, just say it. I'd like to see what you're up to this time." Yan Feng sneered and said, "It's hard to say who's up to this." After that she said to the people present, "Fellow Taoists, I admit that I, Yan Feng, sneaked into the Fox Zen school 9 years ago and really wanted to take revenge. I wanted to destroy the Fox Zen school because of personal grievances." Hearing this, everyone was silent and sighed inwardly. It was precisely because of this hatred that the two sects had withered and were almost in danger of being destroyed. Seeing that everyone was listening to her, Yan Feng continued, "But when I sneaked into the Fox Zen school for the 3rd year, I suddenly found the secret treasure location of the Fox Zen school in Mount Tianlong. Once, I accidentally sneaked in and found the heavenly Jindan technique engraved on the rock wall by the mystical silver fox." Everyone was suddenly amazed. Zhou Ping and Zhang Ling looked at each other, and Zhou Ping immediately asked loudly, "Shu Yan Feng, have you memorized the heavenly Jindan technique?" Yan Feng glanced at her quickly, and there was a hint of sarcasm in her eyes. She simply said no. Zhou Ping was a little annoyed by Yan Feng's gaze. She shouted, "How is that possible? A cultivator like you can recite it backwards even if you read it once. Even if you didn't write it down at that time, you could write it down after you go back. How could you not remember it?" Yan Feng sneered and said, "Fellow Taoists, if the heavenly Jindan technique was placed in front of you, would you practice it?" The cultivators of the various sects looked at each other and didn't speak. As cultivators, if they saw the heavenly Jindan technique in front of them, it was absolutely impossible for them not to practice it. There was no cultivator in the world who could control such a desire. Seeing that everyone was silent, Yan Feng sneered and said, "By the way, when we cultivators see such a superior cultivation method, we will definitely find a way to practice it. But once I practice the heavenly Jindan technique, with the ability of that old fox, Lu Yi, how could he not notice it? Therefore, I didn't look at it at all. I only read a few words and then stopped." Hearing this, everyone was suddenly moved. They looked at Yan Feng in shock and thought to themselves, under the temptation of the heavenly Jindan technique, Yan Feng can even resist the temptation. It can be seen how strong her will is and how firm her will to take revenge is. Terrible. It's really terrible. Whoever has such an opponent will really have trouble sleeping and eating. At this time, Du Fei said, Zhenren Yan, you said that you found a secret cave in the Fox Zen School and the heavenly Jindan technique. But what does this have to do with Zhenren Li? What does it have to do with the Fox Zen School? Everyone knows that the mystical silver fox was invincible in the world at that time. Moreover, she happened to live in the period of Mr. Chen Pu, the author of the heavenly Jindan technique. Is it strange that she wanted to get the heavenly Jindan technique and engrave it on the stone wall of the sect? Yan Feng glanced at him and said with a sneer, Zhenren Du is really protecting Li Yundong everywhere. Hey! Well, when I saw the heavenly Jindan technique, I was so shocked that I immediately refrained from reading it. But I saw that the last 2 sentences were written by the mystical silver fox on the stone wall. Everyone was curious and hurriedly asked, What is it? Tell me quickly. Yan Feng said loudly, the first sentence is, In the 15th year of Tang Shizong, Mr. Naiwen Chen Pu created the heavenly Jindan technique. This technique seizes the creation of heaven and earth and is an extraordinary secret treasure for cultivation. I yearn for it, but I can't get it. However, I spent all my effort traveling to the divine land. It took me more than 10 years to record it here in the 3rd year of later Liang Qianhua. When everyone heard this, they secretly clicked their tongues in wonder. Some people whispered. It said that there are a few great devils in the history of the cultivation world. The mystical silver fox is one of them. I didn't expect that the lost heavenly Jindan technique would be preserved by her. She is an anomaly, really an anomaly. Li Yundong also nodded slightly. He said to Yan Feng in a deep voice, There is indeed such a sentence, but so what? Does it mean anything? Yan Feng sneered and said, I haven't finished yet. There's another sentence. Li Yundong frowned and asked, What else? I didn't see the following sentence at that time. Yan Feng sneered and said, Are you blind? There's another sentence below. Everyone said loudly, Zhenren Yan, tell us quickly. What's the other sentence? Yan Feng sneered and said loudly, This sentence is, Although I have practiced the heavenly Jindan technique to the 9th level, I have committed a divine retribution because of it. I think I will have to go through the retribution in a few days. If I fail, my soul will be scattered. Therefore, I left the heavenly Jindan technique here. I hope that in the future, the successor of our Fox Zen school can succeed and save my scattered soul from heaven and earth, so that I can reappear in the world. This sentence was tantamount to detonating an atomic bomb on the field. Everyone was so shocked that their faces changed greatly. Everyone stood up suddenly, and the scene suddenly became like a pot of boiling porridge. What? The mystical silver fox wants to reappear in the world? Is there such a conspiracy in the Fox Zen school? Zhenren Li, make it clear. Is there such a thing? Even though Li Yundong was very calm, he was still shocked to the spot, but he quickly retorted angrily, It's impossible. There's no such sentence below. If you don't believe me, come back to Mount Tianlong with me now. Yan Feng sneered and said, Didn't you see it? I think you're pretending not to see it. Li Yundong, don't quibble. You're Lu Ye's accomplice. He's dead. Now it's your turn to inherit his will. You just want to resurrect the mystical silver fox, don't you? As she spoke, she didn't wait for Li Yundong to catch his breath and said sternly, Since ancient times, when the 9-tailed celestial fox has descended into the world, has it not brought great disaster to the world? It was because of Daji's younger sister that there was the chaos of the Shang dynasty. It was because of the mystical silver fox that there was the tragedy of the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, as well as Buddhism and Taoism, fighting each other. We cultivators sealed the 9-tailed celestial fox, but I didn't expect that you would not change your mind. You still want to release the 9-tailed celestial fox at all costs. Do you want to confuse the world and bring disaster to the common people? Yan Feng's words were too powerful, and the power was no less than that of a dagger throwing a spear. All the cultivators of various sects looked at the people of the Fox Zen school coldly. Yesterday's update. Vote for recommendation, previous page. Next page error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. Chapter 5:10. Go to Watch Net. The little foxes looked at each other in horror and confusion. Xueqi was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She shouted, "You're talking nonsense. We've never had such an idea." Yanfeng sneered disdainfully and said, "Of course, a thief won't call himself a thief." Ruan Hongling was also shocked and whispered to Ziyuan, "Shiji Ziyuan, is this true or not?" However, Ziyuan shook her head and said, "You've been dealing with him for so long. Don't you know what kind of person he is? He's definitely not that kind of person. I believe him." Ruan Hongling nodded and said, "I believe it too, but the problem now is, this is a matter of offending all the cultivators in the world. What should we do? Should we help him?" Ziyuan looked at him with a complicated look in her eyes. She sighed softly and said in a low voice, "I don't seem to have any other choice." At this time, Ruan Hongling also seemed to have made up her mind. She gritted her teeth and said, "Anyway, our Linggong sect is used to being alone now. At worst, we will become enemies with the whole world. It's not a big deal." As soon as she finished speaking, she took a deep breath, wanting to use her true essence to protect her body in order to guard against any possible changes. Watch Net. 7K. Oath M. But as soon as Ruan Hongling took a deep breath, her expression changed dramatically. She cried out involuntarily, "I can't mobilize my Xueqi." Her shout stunned the cultivators of the other sections. They subconsciously tried to adjust their Xueqi, but they suddenly found that the Xueqi in their bodies was as heavy as cement. No matter how hard they tried, they could not move it as they wished. This was no small matter, and everyone immediately turned pale with fright. "I can't mobilize my true essence either." "Me too. What's going on? Is he poisoned?" The Gazao sect was responsible for supplying everyone with tea and snacks, so when they realized that they had suddenly been poisoned, they immediately looked at Wang Jinyuan. However, when they saw that Wang Jinyuan's face was also pale and his eyes were filled with shock and anger, they could not help but be stunned. Wang Jinyuan said slowly to the crowd, "Don't look at me. I can't mobilize my Xueqi either." Everyone was in an uproar and asked, "Then what's going on?" Zhou Ping said to Zhongling with a pale face, "Master, can you mobilize your Xueqi? Why do I feel so lazy?" Zhongling's face darkened. She shook her head slightly and said in a low voice, "I can't. My true energy seems to have solidified. I can't move it. My feelings are similar to yours." Zhou Ping was both shocked and angry. "Who poisoned him? How dare you?" Zhongling looked at Zhuang Yiting coldly. She sneered and said, "Who else could it be other than this lunatic? Don't talk and focus on circulating your qi." As she spoke, she closed her eyes, completely ignoring the chaotic situation around her, and began to circulate her qi on her own. Ziyuan and the others tried to mobilize their true qi, but they also found that the true qi in their bodies was as heavy as a 1,000-pound stone. They couldn't mobilize it at all, and even if they did, it was extremely slow, like a worm crawling. Seeing that Li Yundong's eyes were closed and there was no expression on his face, she couldn't help but ask, "Li Yundong, how are you?" After a while, Li Yundong opened his eyes and said in a low voice, "No, my true energy seems to have solidified. I can't mobilize it at all." Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, couldn't help but say in horror, "Master, I can still mobilize a little true energy. Why can't you mobilize any at all?" Li Yundong's face was cold and he didn't say anything. Ziyuan's heart skipped a beat. She suddenly said, "Could it be that the higher one's cultivation is, the deeper the poison will be? Could it be that this is the immortal fall?" "The immortal fall? What is this?" Zhou Qin, Xueqi, and the others asked in surprise. Ziyuan looked at Yanfeng in shock and said, "Isn't the immortal fall already lost? How did she get it again?" This kind of poison doesn't cause any harm when it enters the body, but it will slow down the blood flow and stagnate the aura of the whole body. True energy is driven by qi and blood. If qi and blood are slow, true energy will be activated slowly. Therefore, this kind of poison is the great nemesis of cultivators. The higher the cultivation of a person, the deeper the poison will be. Ruan Hongling said in surprise, Could it be that the poison is in the tea? Xueqi immediately said, I didn't drink the tea, but I was also poisoned. Su Chan's heart skipped a beat. She said loudly, I know. The little girl pointed to the incense burner on the field and said, Is it this one? At this time, most of the people also came to their senses. They hadn't expected that so many cultivators here would be defeated by a little girl like Song Yuqiao. Everyone looked at Song Yuqiao angrily and said, Little girl, did you order the immortal fall? Song Yuqiao was so scared by the angry gazes of so many cultivators that she trembled all over. She hid behind Yan Fong with the pipa in her arms, not daring to show her head or speak. Wan Zhenyuan laughed angrily and said, I didn't expect it, I really didn't expect it. Yan Fong, you actually instigated my disciple to rebel. Good, that's really good. Yan Fong sneered and said, Your disciple? Ha ha ha, Xiaoqiao has been my disciple since she was 5 years old, but she's not famous yet. Wan Zhenyuan was shocked. Have you been planning this since then? Yan Fong sneered and said, I just arranged it casually. I didn't expect that it would lead to such a result. Haha, it's really God's will. Wan Zhenyuan laughed angrily and said, Good method, really good method. However, this is a grudge between you and the Fox Zen school. Why do you want us to get involved? Yan Fong laughed and said, If it weren't for this, how could we have schemed against these evildoers of the Fox Zen school? When everyone heard this, they all started cursing. For a moment, there was a lot of dirty words in the field. However, Yan Fong turned a deaf ear to them. She snorted and said, If the ruler is not secretive, he will lose his subject. If the subject is not secretive, he will lose his own life. If he is not secretive, he will cause harm. I think you'd better save some strength. You should know that the more you use your strength, the more effective the immortal fall will be. Be careful not to lose your cultivation after the effect of the medicine is gone. If that happens, don't blame me. When everyone heard this, they became even angrier, but no one dared to speak loudly. They all closed their mouths and began to concentrate on mobilizing their zhenqi. Seeing that everyone had quieted down, Yan Fong said to Li Yundong and the others, Li Yundong, now you are like a turtle in a jar. If you have any last words, just say them quickly. Su Chan, Xueqi, and the others were all furious. They glared at Yan Fong, but Li Yundong's face was calm. He said coldly, How is Ao Wushuang? Yan Fong laughed and said, You can't even protect yourself. Why are you still thinking about that B***tch Ao Wushuang? Li Yundong didn't get angry. He fixed his eyes on Yan Fong and said, I just want to know what you did to her. Yan Fong snorted. With a flick of her wrist, she took out a small purple bell from her bosom. At a glance, Li Yunyang saw that the small bell was about the size of a palm. It was purple and carved with exquisite patterns. It was the Emperor's clock. Yan Fong sneered and said, Ao Wushuang is in it. Do you want to save her? Li Yundong nodded and said, Since the Emperor's clock is with you, I'm relieved. Yan Fong was stunned. She said with some vigilance, What do you want to do? As soon as she finished speaking, Li Yundong suddenly opened his eyes, and his eyes shone brightly. His body was like a fierce tiger, and he rushed toward Yan Fong like lightning. Yan Fong suddenly turned pale with horror. She exclaimed, Impossible! How can you still use qi? As she spoke, she subconsciously blocked with her palms in front of her. The palms of the two of them collided with a loud bang. Yan Fong's body trembled violently, as if she had been hit by an electric current. Li Yundong quickly lowered his body and poked at Yan Fong's qi acupoint with his fingers. Yan Fong had suffered losses in Li Yundong's hands one after another before, and her fear of him had already gone deep into her subconscious. She was hit by Li Yundong's palm force, and her whole body was numb. For a moment, her reaction was a little slow, and Li Yundong poked the qi acupoint in her lower abdomen. The qi acupoint was a major acupoint of the Ren meridian of the human body. Once it was poked, the whole body would be numb and unable to exert any strength. Yan Fong immediately fell to the ground. She looked at Li Yundong in shock and anger and said, Impossible, how can you still move? At this time, Li Yundong was also a little out of breath. His face was pale, but he just stared at Yan Fong and didn't say anything. Seeing his appearance, Yan Fong suddenly had an idea. She laughed and said, You really deserve it. You can't live. You're courting death. After being hit by my immortal fall, you still tried to use qi to struggle. Now look. You found that you can't move your whole body, right? A layer of sweat appeared on Li Yundong's forehead. He said coldly, "Can you move?" Yan Feng sneered and said, "Humph, we're all the same, so there's no need to criticize each other. However, don't forget that I still have my disciple here." As she said this, she shouted to Song Yuqiao behind her, "Xiaoqiao, go up and kill this evil man." Zhou Qin and Su Chan were so shocked that they wanted to grit their teeth and stand up, especially Zhou Qin. Many of her bones were broken. As soon as she was about to move, the pain made her break out in a cold sweat. She snorted and almost collapsed on the spot. Zi Yuan was quick to react. She immediately grabbed Su Chan and Zhou Qin and said in a low voice, "Don't do anything stupid. Don't move after being hit by the immortal fall. After the effect of the drug passes, you will recover on your own. If you force yourself to move, you will be like Li Yundong now. On the contrary, you won't be able to move at all. Moreover, the recovery time will be greatly extended." Zhou Qin didn't say anything. She gritted her teeth, as if she was enduring the severe pain. Su Chan's face was full of shock and anger. She shouted, "Should I just watch Yundong be killed?" Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, "Don't be silly. Li Yundong has been preparing for this day for a long time." However, he didn't expect that Yan Feng would use such a powerful poison as the immortal fall. "He will be fine. Don't worry." Su Chan stared at her in surprise and doubt. What? Did Yundong know that Zhuang Yiting Sherbo was Yan Feng? Zi Yuan nodded gently. That's right. Su Chan and the others were shocked. They couldn't help but look at the field. Zi Yuan sighed softly. "It's just that I really didn't expect the Taoist assembly to turn out like this. Too many accidents have happened together. The situation is already chaotic and out of control." At this time, the cultivators of the various sects on the sidelines were all closing their eyes to circulate their qi. They could hear everything clearly, but none of them were in the mood to help either side. What if their cultivation quotient regressed greatly in the future if they moved? It was a dog-eat-dog situation on both sides. They could just watch the fire from the other side. They wouldn't do such a thing that would harm themselves and benefit others. After Yan Feng shouted at Song Yuqiao, she didn't see any movement behind her. She resisted the severe pain in her qi and turned her head to look, only to see Song Yuqiao standing there trembling all over, looking at Li Yundong with fear in her eyes. She was too timid to go forward. Yan Feng suddenly flew into a rage and scolded her. "Are you deaf? Go and kill this evil man." See. Chapter 5:11. When Song Yuqiao heard Yan Feng's roar, she was so shocked that her whole body trembled. Her eyelids kept twitching, and her long eyelashes trembled gently. Her eyes were full of fear. She was weak and introverted. Usually, it would take her a long time to step on an ant. Now she was asked to kill someone, which really scared her soul out of her body. What's more, the person she was going to kill was Li Yundong, who had shown great power to drive the Japanese away. Song Yuqiao's teeth were chattering. She looked at Li Yundong. Not to mention whether she was willing or not, and not to mention whether Li Yundong had the ability to resist. Just thinking about Li Yundong's awe-inspiring power made her legs weak and her whole body weak. "Go to the internet." The poor little girl said in a trembling voice, "Master, I don't dare." Yan Feng was so angry that she raised her eyebrows and said, "You be ****, I've taught you for so long. Why wouldn't you dare?" Song Yuqiao's eyes were filled with tears of shock and fear. She said in a trembling voice, "But I just don't dare. Master, this is a human being. How can you ask me to kill him?" Only then did Yan Feng remember that the nominal disciple she had accepted was very weak. It was too much to ask her to kill someone. She suppressed her anger and said softly, "Silly disciple, this person is a great villain. If you kill him, you can save many people, including you and your master. You are doing justice on behalf of heaven. Not only will everyone in the world not blame you, but they will also thank you." Song Yuqiao's parents had died when she was a child, and she had been adopted by Yan Feng as a disciple since she was a child. To her, Yan Feng was like a parent, but also like a master. Therefore, Yan Feng's words were extremely heavy and could be said to be as heavy as a mountain. After hearing this, she couldn't help but feel a little braver. She asked timidly, "Is it true, master?" Seeing that Song Yuqiao was moved, Yan Feng was overjoyed and continued to say softly, "Of course it's true. When have I ever lied to you? After you kill this person, I'll take you far away to a place where no one can find you. We'll live happily ever after, okay?" Song Yuqiao's face was full of surprise. She asked tentatively, "Master, are you serious? You won't you abandon me again?" Yan Feng sighed softly and said, "Silly girl, how can I bear to leave you behind? Think about it, if the man you love the most was snatched away by someone else, would you want to take revenge? If it were you and you discovered such a shocking conspiracy, would you want to stop them and save the world?" Song Yuqiao thought very seriously. She bit her red lips hard with her snow-white teeth, and there seemed to be a battle in her mind. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others all looked at Song Yuqiao nervously, waiting for this weak little girl to make a decision. Song Yuqiao stared at Yan Feng closely. She hesitated for a long time, then suddenly gritted her teeth. She took the golden hairpin from her hair, held it tightly with both hands, and walked toward Li Yunyang, trembling all over. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin exclaimed at the same time, "Stop! No! How dare you!" The little foxes also exclaimed at the same time, "Don't kill him. Leader is the best person in the world. Don't kill him. If you want to kill someone, kill us." When Song Yuqiao heard their shouts, she couldn't help but tremble and stop again. She looked at Su Chan and the others, only to see that they were looking at her with frightened and pleading eyes, as if they couldn't wait to die for Li Yunyang. Song Yuqiao hesitated for a moment. As soon as she hesitated, Yan Feng, who was behind her, immediately said loudly, "What are you hesitating for? These are all vixens in the world. They can do nothing but bring disaster to the world. Do you want to see the world in chaos? Do you want to be the culprit who helps the evildoer? In the future, when the world is in chaos and the people suffer, you will be the initiator." Song Yuqiao's body trembled. She gritted her teeth, forcibly looked away, and walked toward Li Yunyang. Song Yuqiao walked up to Li Yunyang. She lowered her head and said in a sobbing tone, Don't blame me. I didn't want to." As she said this, she raised the golden hairpin in her hand high. For a moment, the people who had been closing their eyes to control their qi couldn't help opening their eyes. They widened their eyes and couldn't believe that Li Yunyang, who could even be dispelled by Mahamayuri, was going to die in the hands of such a weak girl. Everyone saw that the golden hairpin was long, thin, and extremely sharp. The sharp thorns reflected dazzling light in the sunlight shining in from outside the building, dazzling everyone's eyes for a moment. Song Yuqiao held the golden hairpin trembling all over and was about to push it forward, but at this time, she couldn't help but look at Li Yunyang. She saw that Li Yunyang was staring at her. Not only was there no hatred or anger in his eyes, but they were very gentle and full of sympathy. This kind of gaze was like warm seawater, wrapping Song Yuqiao tightly, making her involuntarily think, why doesn't he hate me? Why is he looking at me like this? Song Yuqiao said in panic, "Why are you looking at me?" Li Yunyang smiled slightly, sighed, and said, "If you don't look at me, how do you know I'm looking at you?" Song Yuqiao immediately looked away in horror. "I'm not looking at you. Don't look at me." Li Yunyang smiled and said, "What you were looking at just now was not me, but your heart. Even if you look away, it's useless, because you can't face your own heart. You don't believe that I'm a bad person at all, do you?" This sentence hit Song Yuqiao like a bolt of lightning. She trembled all over and couldn't help opening her mouth wide. A voice in her heart shouted loudly. He would rather withdraw from the Taoist assembly himself than take the immortal pen and bear the responsibility for his disciple. He was forced by everyone to lose the qualification to participate in the competition, but he didn't say a word of evil. Instead, he turned the tide at the critical moment. Could such a responsible and courageous man be a bad person? Could a person with such a gentle and kind gaze be a bad person? Song Yuqiao stood there like a statue. Although Yan Feng, who was behind her, couldn't see her expression, her heart suddenly skipped a beat. She couldn't help saying loudly, "Xiao Qiao, don't listen to his evil words. This person is best at bewitching people. You have to control yourself, Xiao Qiao. There are so many people waiting for you to save them." Song Yuqiao couldn't help looking back at Yan Feng, and then at Li Yunyang. Suddenly, the golden hairpin in her hand fell to the ground with a clang. She covered her face with both hands and cried, "Master, I can't do it. I really can't do it. I'm sorry." As she said this, she quickly ran downstairs. Yan Feng was furious and shouted, "Useless thing, come back! Come back quickly!" But no matter how she shouted, Song Yuqiao didn't look back. She sobbed all the way and gradually went away. Only Yan Feng's angry roar echoed in the small building. Only then did Su Chan and the others relax and breathe a sigh of relief. Ruan Hongling sneered and said, "Humph, let's see what other tricks Yan Feng has up her sleeve." After Zi Yuan was relieved, she closed her eyes and said in a deep voice, "Don't talk. Concentrate on running your qi." Ruan Hongling glanced around and saw that everyone upstairs had closed their eyes and were quietly running their qi. At this time, whoever could recover first would be the strongest master on the scene and would be able to control the power of life and death. Even Yan Feng suppressed her anger and stopped talking. She closed her eyes and concentrated on running her qi. Ruan Hongling's heart skipped a beat. She whispered to Zi Yuan, "Shiji Zi Yuan, what if someone comes at this time?" Zi Yuan didn't even open her eyes. She said, "The immortal fall in this incense burner is still burning. As long as you get close to it and smell it, your cultivation will drop to the lowest point. You won't be able to run your qi, and you'll be even worse than an ordinary person who has no strength to truss a chicken. However, if an ordinary person comes at this time, it will be terrible, because ordinary people will not be affected by the immortal fall." Hearing this, Ruan Hongling immediately closed her eyes. She thought to herself, if an ordinary person came and killed everyone here with a steel knife, it would be the most ridiculous thing in the world. I can't die in the hands of an ordinary person. At this time, everyone upstairs was concentrating on running their qi. For a moment, the atmosphere was stagnant and quiet. The originally quiet and elegant building was now as quiet as a cemetery, which made people's hair stand on end. All the cultivators in the building were motionless like stone statues. The air around them seemed to have frozen. Only the first-grade immortal incense in the incense burner was slowly burning, emitting wisps of faint smoke that spread out in all directions. Time passed bit by bit, and the sky slowly changed from a golden crow hanging high in the sky to a jade rabbit rising. The sky gradually darkened. In the distance of the garden building, a young man hiding in the corner of a dark alley couldn't help but say to an old man beside him, "Master Purin, it's almost dark. How long do we have to wait?" Master Purin of Shiyuan Temple was dressed in ordinary clothes. He lowered his eyes, as if he was standing in meditation. He said softly, "Feikong, why are you in such a hurry? The devil hasn't made a move yet, so naturally, we can't." Feikong looked a little anxious. "But how long do we have to wait?" Purin smiled slightly, opened his eyes and said, "When the devil can't help but make a move, we will naturally activate the Bafong demon subduing formation and subdue him." Feikong took a deep breath and said, "What if he doesn't make a move?" Purin smiled, closed his eyes again, put his palms together, and chanted the name of Buddha. "Amitabha, if he doesn't make a move today, he will sooner or later." Feikong had no choice but to suppress his temper again, put his palms together, and silently recited the scripture. After an unknown period of time, the immortal fall in the incense burner on the small building suddenly dimmed. This peerless poisonous smoke, which had made many cultivators surrender, was finally exhausted. Just as the last wisp of fragrance gradually dissipated in the air, two figures suddenly floated into the small building. The two of them stood side by side. Their figures were graceful under the moonlight, but their faces could not be seen clearly. The taller one quickly glanced around the small building, smiled slightly, and said faintly, "Yan Feng, you didn't expect this day to come, did you?" The other one gnashed her teeth and sneered. "Shimmy, why are you talking to her? Hurry up and kill her." When Yan Feng heard this voice, she immediately opened her eyes. She took a closer look and was shocked. "It's you." Chapter 5:12. At this time, there were two women standing in the field. One was petite but graceful. It was Lu Yuehong of the Fox Zen School. Next to her stood a charming and seductive woman. It was Xueqi, who had disappeared before. Yan Feng suddenly saw the two of them and was shocked. She asked in surprise, "Why are you two here?" But she quickly reacted. She gritted her teeth and looked at Li Yundong. "So you already knew?" Li Yundong's face was expressionless. He didn't even open his eyes and didn't speak. Go to see the net. Lu Yuehong, who was standing on the field with a frosty expression, said, That's right. Leader has known for a long time. Yan Feng said loudly, That's impossible. When did you know that I had possessed Zhuang Yuting? Lu Yuehong snorted and said, You pretended very well, but the net of heaven has long arms. Yan Feng sneered and said, How could the two of you and Li Yundong, who is so careless, notice it? As she said this, she suddenly turned her head and glared at Zi Yuan, saying angrily, You must have noticed it, didn't you? At this time, Zi Yuan also opened her eyes. She nodded slightly and said, Yes, I noticed it, but Li Yundong was sure of it. Yan Feng shouted angrily, That's impossible. Where did I make a mistake? Zi Yuan said unhurriedly, Since the last time we went to the buffet, Li Yundong asked us to buy clothes, and you took the opportunity to show up, I had some doubts. Because at that time, your young spirit was extremely strong. Unless you had a host, it was impossible for your cultivation to not have regressed at all. So at that time, I immediately went to the place where the people of the Fox Zen school were changing clothes. At that time, everyone was outside, and only you and Chao Yi were in the changing room. At this time, I had already targeted the two of you. Yan Feng stared at Zi Yuan and sneered, her eyes full of sarcasm. Zi Yuan quickly said, Of course, I also guessed that you might have shown up on purpose to arouse our suspicion and make the Fox Zen school kill each other, right? Yan Feng's expression changed. She snorted and said nothing. Zi Yuan knew that she had guessed correctly, so she said, But what I don't understand is that you hid very well after that. Until one day, you suddenly appeared and led us to Mount Gazao. You wanted to expose Li Yundong in front of everyone and take his life. Why did you do that? Yan Feng stared at Zi Yuan for a long time. Suddenly she laughed and said, Finally, there's something you don't know, Zi Yuan? This is truly shocking and lamentable. In the face of Yan Feng's sarcasm, Zi Yuan didn't get angry. She just smiled faintly and said, I was born on a cliff, and my knowledge is boundless. It's normal for me to have things I don't know. What's so strange about it? Martial uncle, don't you always boast of your meticulous schemes? Don't you want to know when Li Yundong realized that Zhuang Yuting was you? Yan Feng's expression changed greatly. She immediately asked, When did he notice it? Zi Yuan smiled and said, When De Sanxian was established, President Chao came to congratulate you. When you first saw her, you were extremely shocked. Later, President Chao left De Sanxian and told him where she was going. That night, she was almost killed, and only we knew where she lived. So the murderer could only be among us. At that time, Li Yundong went to the scene of the murder and accidentally found some evidence at the scene. This evidence is exactly where you were smart all your life, but you were muddle-headed for a moment. Yan Feng said with a sullen face. What evidence? Zi Yuan snorted and said, Although there was not much blood left at the scene, and it was the same as the bloody clothes that Li Yundong asked Su Chan to find in Chao Yi's room, Li Yundong used a method to find two kinds of blood on the clothes and at the scene of the murder at the same time. One was Chao Yi's, and the other was yours. Yan Feng said in surprise. How is that possible? How did you know? Zi Yuan looked at Yan Feng sympathetically. She sighed slightly and said, Sherbua, you are really smart all your life, but you are muddle-headed for a moment. Have you forgotten that in modern society, there is a kind of science called blood testing and DNA testing? Yan Feng suddenly trembled all over. Her mouth was slightly open, and her face was full of disbelief. It seemed that she hadn't expected that she would be so careless that she would make a mistake in this simplest link. Zi Yuan sighed and said, When the police sent the report the next day, Li Yundong knew that you and Chao Yi had gone to President Chao's residence at the same time, but you claimed that you hadn't gone out. Isn't that a confession? You worked so hard to frame Chao Yi, but you didn't expect to be killed because of this, did you? Yan Feng's expression changed a few times. She gritted her teeth and said, No wonder Li Yundong appeared there again. Humph. She looked at Chao Yi unwillingly and sneered. You must be very proud now, right? Chao Yi stared at Yan Feng coldly and said non-committally, You are about to die. What else do you want to say? Lu Yuehong, who was standing to one side, glared at Yan Feng and said sternly, Shimmy, what else is there to say to this person? How many people has she harmed? From eldest Shiji Mo Ashi to Yi Yu, And then to Zhuang Yuting? Today, I will make you pay with your blood. After that, Lu Yuehong let out a shrill roar and pounced on Yan Fong angrily. Her fingers were like hooks, as if she wanted to dig out Yan Fong's heart with one hand. But as soon as Lu Yuehong's hand touched Yan Fong's body, Yan Fong suddenly moved. She clasped Lu Yuehong's arm with both hands and twisted it hard. Then she kicked Lu Yuehong's body heavily with her leg. Lu Yuehong hadn't expected that Yan Fong would still be able to move. She suddenly screamed, and the bones in her arm were broken. Her body flew out like a sandbag. Everyone was shocked by this turn of events. They did not expect Yan Fong to be the first to recover. The expressions of Su Chan, Zhou Qin, and the others changed dramatically, and Zi Yuan's face suddenly became very ugly. Yan Fong laughed wildly and said, "You didn't expect this, did you?" As she said this, she looked at Li Yundong with a murderous look in her eyes. Yan Fong knew that as long as she killed him, the Fox Zen school would collapse without a fight. As soon as Xueqi saw this, she immediately said in a cold voice, "If you want to kill the leader, you have to get through me first." Yan Fong glared at Xueqi fiercely. "You always go against me. Humph. Do you think you're a good person? Just in time, I'll settle old and new grudges with you together." After that, she let out a shrill scream and was about to pounce on him. Unexpectedly at this moment, Li Yundong suddenly opened his eyes, and an extremely sharp gaze shot toward Yan Fong like a sharp arrow. Yan Fong's heart suddenly trembled. She thought to herself, "Damn it, has this little thief recovered?" Her subconscious fear of Li Yundong was extremely deep, so she immediately gave up the idea of going forward. Yan Fong's mind raced like lightning. She soon thought, even if this evil thief has recovered, it doesn't matter. As long as I grab the immortal pen, even if he has great ability, he can't do anything to me. Thinking of this, Yan Fong suddenly stopped moving forward, twisted her body, and pounced on Wang Jinyuan. At this time, Wang Jinyuan had been poisoned by the fragrance of the immortal fall, so he was defenseless. He could only watch helplessly as Yan Fong approached him and slapped him in the chest. Wang Jinyuan's mind was like lightning, and he was cunning. He immediately understood what Yan Fong meant, so he immediately gathered all the strength in his body and threw the immortal pen toward the field. Then he ran away like a wisp of smoke. Yan Fong sneered in her heart. Without looking at Wang Jinyuan, she turned her head to grab the immortal pen. However, she saw the immortal pen roll in the air and fall to the ground with a clatter. A girl bent down and reached out to pick up the pen. The girl was tall and dressed fashionably and beautifully. Who else could it be but Ding Nan? Yan Fong was shocked. She hadn't expected that someone would have recovered. She immediately shouted with a ferocious face, "Put down the immortal pen." Ding Nan's cultivation was later than Zhou Qin's, and she didn't have the help of Renyuan Jindan. In particular, she hadn't built the Zhuji phase and hadn't even stepped into the threshold of cultivation, so her cultivation was the lowest here. However, the power of the immortal fall was that the higher one's cultivation was, the deeper the poison would be. On the contrary, it would be easier for those with lower cultivation to recover. When Ding Nan saw the immortal pen flying toward her, she subconsciously picked it up, but it immediately attracted Yan Fong's killing intent. For a moment, she was a little afraid and hesitated. Should she throw the immortal pen out or keep it? Unexpectedly, Zhang Yuan suddenly opened his eyes and shouted, "Pinger, run!" Without thinking, Ding Nan subconsciously turned around and ran. Yan Fong was extremely angry and shouted, "Stop!" She moved like lightning and caught up with Ding Nan in the blink of an eye. Like a tiger catching a sheep, she grabbed Ding Nan's neck with one hand. At this time, only Yan Fong, Ding Nan, and Xueqi, who was guarding Li Yundong, could move. At this time, Xueqi was focused on Li Yundong. As long as Li Yundong was fine, even if everyone around her died, her expression would not change. Seeing that Yan Fong was about to grab Ding Nan, Zhang Yuan suddenly took out a Rui jade from his arms. He quickly bit his index finger and smeared his blood on the handle of the Rui jade. Then he shouted, "Yan Fong." As soon as the Rui jade was stained with blood, a lot of black qi immediately emerged, becoming terrifying and ferocious. An invisible black mist instantly rushed toward Yan Fong's body. When Yan Fong heard Zhang Yuan's shout, she immediately felt her heart beat violently, as if someone was pinching it. She could hardly breathe and lost all her strength. For a moment, Yan Fong lost control of her body and fell to the ground in the blink of an eye. However, she soon regained her strength and got up. She looked at Zhang Yuan in shock and anger and shouted, "What kind of powerful magical weapon is this?" Cultivators often fought with lightning and thunder, and it happened in the blink of an eye. At this moment, Yan Fong almost lost all control of her body. It was incredible that a cultivator like her would fall to the ground. If it weren't for the fact that Zhang Yuan had not fully recovered at this time and could only barely control his qi, Yan Fong would have been dead by now. In Yan Fong's opinion, the powerful magical weapon in Zhang Yuan's hand was simply sinister and vicious. If caught off guard, even a Jinxian would suffer a big setback and might even be doomed eternally. After Zhang Yuan shouted, his face suddenly turned pale, and a layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. He turned to Ding Nan and said, "Pinger, you go first. I'll hold her back." At this time, Ding Nan was already standing at the railing on the second floor, staring at everyone present in horror and vigilance. As long as there was the slightest movement, she would immediately jump over the railing and escape. However, the scheming Ding Nan also knew that she hadn't even reached the Xueqi phase. Even if she could escape, she wouldn't be able to get far. Holding an immortal pen was like holding a gold ingot and walking in a busy city. She would definitely be killed. Therefore, she didn't rush to escape. Instead, she pretended to be concerned and said loudly to Zhang Yuan, "Master, if you don't go, I won't go either." Zhang Yuan was greatly moved, and the last trace of suspicion he had for Ding Nan disappeared. He took a deep breath, and his snow-white face suddenly flushed. He sneered at Yan Fong and said, "Zhenren Yan, I'm going to take this immortal pen today. If you don't want to die, come up." I'm sorry. I've been busy outside for a whole day, and I've just entered the house. Chapter 5:13. Yan Fong hadn't expected that Zhang Yuan would suddenly intervene regardless of everything. She immediately sneered and said, "Zhang Yuan, your powerful magical weapon is indeed powerful, but do you think you can stop me like this?" As she said this, Yan Fong suddenly took out a talisman and poured all her zhenqi into it. The talisman immediately burned and instantly turned into a black shadow that pounced on Ding Nan. Go to see net. 7K. Oath M. Zhang Yuan's face changed. He knew that this was the Liu Jiayin Master Talisman, and this black shadow was transformed from a resentful spirit. His powerful magical weapon could be used to deal with living people, but it couldn't deal with such a resentful spirit. His face changed and his eyes turned. He immediately shouted at Yan Fong again, "Yan Fong!" As soon as Yan Fong was called by Zhang Yuan, she immediately lost control of her body and fell to the ground with a plop. She flew into a rage out of humiliation and let out a shrill roar. The black shadow she had sent out immediately rushed toward Ding Nan more fiercely. Ding Nan was so shocked that her eyes suddenly widened. Just as she was about to turn around and run away, she suddenly heard Zhou Qin shout, "Ding Nan, do you want to die? Throw away the immortal pen." Ding Nan's body trembled. Zhou Qin had left a deep impression in her heart for a long time, so she subconsciously threw the immortal pen in her hand toward the field. As soon as she threw it out, Yan Fong immediately let out another shrill roar. As soon as the black shadow rushed to Ding Nan, it suddenly turned around and pounced on the immortal pen. Ding Nan only felt a bone-chilling qi pass in front of her, and all her hair stood on end in an instant. She knew that she had just taken a turn at the gate of hell. If it hadn't been for Zhou Qin's reminder, she would have been dead by now. But before Ding Nan could think deeply, she saw the situation suddenly change. After the immortal pen was thrown out by her, it landed in front of a Taoist priest of the Qingwei sect. The Taoist priest's eyes suddenly lit up. He immediately picked up the immortal pen with the tip of his foot, and then immediately pinched his fingers together. He slapped at the Liu Jiayin Master Talisman that Yan Fong had released and shouted, "Thunder!" With a rumble, a bolt of lightning shot out from his hand and turned the resentful ghost into a cloud of green smoke. But before he could be happy for long, someone behind him slapped him hard on the back, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood, and the immortal pen in his hand fell to the ground. The man turned his head and saw that it was a Taoist priest of the Jinshan sect. He was holding the immortal pen in one hand, and he didn't even have time to withdraw his other hand from his back. He laughed wildly and said, "Immortal pen! I got the immortal pen." But as soon as he finished speaking, a white light suddenly flashed, and his hand holding the immortal pen was chopped off and fell to the ground. The Taoist priest of the Jinshan sect held his broken wrist and howled. A figure immediately passed by him and took away his broken arm along with the immortal pen. When the disciples of the Jinshan sect saw this, they immediately scolded, "The bastards of the Donghua sect actually dared to sneak up on us." After saying that, they pounced forward. The disciples of the Donghua sect did not show any weakness and immediately drew their swords to fight back. For a moment, the young cultivators of the various sects upstairs were fighting each other. Ding Nan and Yen Fong were both stunned at this time. Neither of them had expected that the cultivators of the various sects were not easy to deal with. Many of them had recovered long ago, but they had been holding back, waiting for the current situation to suddenly erupt. They all wanted to be the fishermen who would benefit from it in the end. Everyone on the field was fighting. For a moment, in the quiet and elegant small building, swords and sabers were flashing and murderous. The cultivators of the various sects, who had always been calm, all looked ferocious at this time, and their eyes were red. Just as everyone was fighting fiercely, Yen Fong laughed and said, "Ridiculous, it's really ridiculous. This group of people usually have the face of a Taoist master, but now they're all tearing up. It's so ridiculous." After saying that, her figure was as fast as lightning, and she rushed into the crowd. Most of the cultivators who were fighting were young cultivators. Their cultivation was relatively low, so they recovered faster. There were also some with higher cultivation, but they forced themselves to fight. Some of their cultivation and kung fu were far inferior to Yen Fong's, while others could barely control their qi. Their skills were greatly reduced, so how could they compete with Yen Fong? For a moment, Yen Fong was like a tiger that had entered a flock of sheep, beating everyone up. Everyone cursed, but there was nothing they could do about it. They could only watch helplessly as she snatched the immortal pen back. But as soon as Yen Fong got the immortal pen, before she had time to be proud and use it, she heard Zhang Yuan shout her name again. "Yen Fong!" Yen Fong immediately fell to the ground with a plop, and the immortal pen fell to the ground with a clatter. In the blink of an eye, it was snatched away by Zhang Yuan. The cultivators who had just suffered a great loss from Yen Fong laughed wildly when they saw her fall. Some even hit her when she was down and wanted to make up for it. Yen Fong was extremely angry. She got up and knocked the people who approached her to the ground. Then she glared at Zhang Yuan ferociously and said, "You old ****starred, are you tired of living? Be careful, or I'll burn down your Mount Wuhua." Zhang Yuan's heart skipped a beat. He also knew that Yen Fong was an extreme person. Once she became enemies, it would definitely be a terrible thing that would not end until she died. If she really did what she said, it would really make people restless. Since ancient times, there had only been one who could be a thief for 1,000 days. How could one guard against a thief for 1,000 days? Zhang Yuan's heart was filled with evil thoughts. He wanted to kill Yen Fong, but just as he was about to mobilize his zhenqi, he suddenly felt short of breath and couldn't breathe. A strange red color appeared on his face, and his breathing became extremely rapid. He coughed violently twice and even coughed up blood. Yen Fong laughed and said, "You brought this on yourself. You forced yourself to control your qi. Now you regret it. Go to hell." After that, she moved her body and was about to step forward. But as soon as she finished speaking, she heard a young man shout coldly, "Yen Fong, you can't even protect yourself. You'd better take care of yourself." When Yen Fong heard this voice, her whole body suddenly trembled. She turned her head and saw Li Yundong looking at her with a sneer on his face, slowly walking toward her step by step. This time, Yen Fong was almost scared out of her wits, and she regretted it so much that her intestines almost turned green. In an instant, Yen Fong realized that Li Yundong had not fully recovered just now. He had just stared at her with his eyes and dispersed her killing intent, making her think that Li Yundong had already had room to fight back. Therefore, she had some concerns in her heart and didn't dare to make a move against him. But now, Li Yundong had completely recovered. When this evil thief recovered, how could she be his match? She could only hate herself for not having a firm will at the beginning and not decisively attacking Li Yundong. Otherwise, how could she have ended up like this? Yen Fong's thoughts raced like lightning. She let out a shrill scream of unwillingness. Her face became extremely ferocious and terrifying, and her black hair stood on end. She said sternly, "Li Yundong, I'm not done with you." After that, her young spirit went out of her body in an instant. Her ferocious and mournful face also froze, and her body fell to the ground like a stone. Her yang spirit turned into a blue light and quickly escaped from the small building. Li Yundong's eyes widened and he shouted, "Where are you going?" He immediately sent his yang spirit out of his body and chased after her with the burning thumb pot. In this small building, Li Yundong and Yen Fong, who had recovered the fastest, left in the blink of an eye. For a moment, everyone's eyes were fixed on Zhang Yuan, who was holding the immortal pen. Before long, they shouted in unison and rushed toward Zhang Yuan like crazy. Zhang Yuan's face changed greatly. He gritted his teeth, pointed to the few people at the front, and shouted their names repeatedly. Suddenly, these people trembled all over. Zhang Yuan's powerful magical weapon could seize souls. When he shouted the other party's name, the ghost in the jade rui would instantly rush into the other party's body and hook their souls. If the other party's cultivation was profound and the Niden was vigorous and condensed, then the ghost could not hook the other party's soul. It could only temporarily cause the other party's qi and blood to stagnate, thus making the other party fall and lose the ability to resist. If this person's foundation was weak, then the 3 souls and 7 spirits would immediately be hooked out of the body by the ghost and killed by Zhang Yuan's powerful magical weapon in the blink of an eye. After Zhang Yuan shouted the names of these people, they fell to the ground like wooden stakes. Their faces turned pale, and in the blink of an eye, they were no longer alive. A mass of colorful qi was pulled out of the 7 orifices of the people who had fallen to the ground by a mass of black qi, and then it rushed toward Zhang Yuan's jade rui. As soon as the 3 souls and 7 spirits of these people were hooked back to the jade rui, the black qi all over its body immediately surged, as if it had swallowed the 3 souls and 7 spirits of these people and its power had greatly increased. When everyone saw this, they were all shocked. Someone pointed at Zhang Yuan in horror and scolded him sternly. "Zhang Yuan, how dare you refine such a sinister and vicious powerful magical weapon in private? Aren't you afraid of retribution? Zhang Yuan, are you looking for death? How dare you use such a sinister and inferior powerful magical weapon? Aren't you afraid of divine retribution? How dare you kill my fellow disciples? Zhang Yuan, the Jinshan sect will not let you off." Zhou Qin also looked at the powerful magical weapon in Zhang Yuan's hand in horror and said in fear, "What kind of powerful magical weapon is this? Is it so powerful? He died as soon as I shouted his name?" Zi Yuan also looked at Zhang Yuan in horror. There was fear in her eyes as she said, "Could this be the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade? Wasn't this powerful magical weapon destroyed during the Zhengde period of the Ming dynasty? How could it have been refined again?" Su Chan also looked at Zhang Yuan in horror. She was afraid that if he turned his head and shouted her name, she would die. She said in a trembling voice, "How could there be such an evil powerful magical weapon in the world? If it were to fall into the hands of an evil person, he could call out the name of the person within a range of 50 feet to reap their soul. The magic treasure would become stronger and stronger, and one day, the power of the magic treasure would surpass the power of the strongest person in the world of cultivation. At that time, the person holding the magic treasure would die if he called out the name of the person. Who can be his opponent?" Guan Hongling also looked at Zhang Yuan in horror. She said, "Fortunately, Zhang Yuan was poisoned by the immortal fall at this time. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. If he hadn't been poisoned, I'm afraid that even if Taoist Master Zhang of the Zhengyi school came in person, he wouldn't have dared to fight him face to face. He could only retreat and run away." This powerful magical weapon was said to be invincible within 50 feet during the Zhengde period. At that time, I thought it was just bragging, but now I see that it's really terrifying. The women were frightened by Zhang Yuan's powerful magical weapon, and so were the cultivators of the other sections. Even Zhang Ling, who had always been hot-tempered and hated evil, suddenly opened her eyes and looked at Zhang Yuan in horror and anger. She didn't dare to say anything, for fear that Zhang Yuan would shout her name in anger. Zhang Yuan saw that everyone was glaring at him, but most of them didn't dare to say anything. No one dared to come forward again. Zhang Yuan laughed wildly. He waved his sleeve, grabbed the immortal pen in one hand, and quickly rushed to Ding Nan. He shouted, "Let's go." Then he turned into a cloud of black smoke and left the small building in the blink of an eye. Zhang Yuan took Ding Nan and fled, and no one dared to chase after him. After flying for a long time, he finally returned to his cave in Mount Wuhua. As soon as he landed, he suddenly knelt on the ground and spat out a mouthful of blood. Ding Nan was shocked and hurriedly asked, "Master, what's wrong with you?" Zhang Yuan's face was as white as a sheet. He smiled bitterly, raised his trembling hand, and said to Ding Nan, "Quick, go and get the 9-turn spirit restoring pill. It's in the 7th purple bottle in the 3rd shelf of the closet." After that, he spat out another mouthful of blood. Ding Nan knew that this was the result of Zhang Yuan's force chi flow just now. She immediately got up and hurriedly found the pill. But when she walked over to Zhang Yuan, she saw the old man lying on the ground and spitting out blood with his back facing her defenselessly. Ding Nan's heart suddenly skipped a beat, and a bold idea suddenly came to her mind. Now he has the immortal pen and the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade, and I have the threaded hairpin of soul traversing. As long as I kill this lecherous old man, with these 3 powerful magical weapons in hand, won't I be invincible in the world? Will Li Yundong still look at me in the eye? At the thought of this, Ding Nan's heart suddenly beat violently. Chapter 5:14. As soon as this thought came to Ding Nan's mind, her heart suddenly pounded as if it was going to jump out of her throat in the next second. Go to the internet. Desire was like a devil. Once it came, it was difficult to leave. In particular, Ding Nan gritted her teeth and clenched her fists when she saw Zhang Yuan weakly turning his back to her and constantly coughing up blood. Her hand slowly touched the threaded hairpin of soul traversal hidden at her waist. But when she was about to touch the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, she suddenly noticed that although Zhang Yuan had his back to her, one of his hands was still tightly grasping the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade. Ding Nan's heart suddenly skipped a beat. She thought, no, this old lecher has always been scheming and has always been on guard against me. Moreover, he always has a backup plan. If I fail to kill him, I'll be digging my own grave. What's more, even if I kill him now, I haven't reached the Xueqi phase and can't use these 3 powerful magical weapons. In the end, the other people of the Yin-Yang sect may take advantage of the situation. No, now is not the time to kill this old lecher. In the blink of an eye, Ding Nan's mind raced. Such intense psychological activity only lasted for a moment. Her hand quickly left the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, bent down to help Zhang Yuan up, poured the medicine into her palm, and fed it to him. After eating the 9-turn spirit restoration pill, Zhang Yuan circulated his qi for a while, and a trace of normal color returned to his face. He took a long breath, looked at Ding Nan meaningfully, and said, "Pinger, if you had any bad intentions just now, I'm afraid you wouldn't be alive now." Ding Nan's heart suddenly trembled. She thought to herself, that was close. This old lecher was indeed on guard. Ding Nan was shrewd and didn't show any fear on her face. Instead, she cried angrily, "I didn't expect you to still be on guard against me at this time. What's the point of being your disciple?" After that, she got up and was about to leave. Zhang Yuan quickly pulled her back with an apologetic smile and said softly, "Good disciple, since you've been possessed by this woman, your temperament has changed greatly. It's inevitable that I have some concerns. You've done very well this time, and I'm very touched. Don't worry, I won't be suspicious of you anymore." Ding Nan's acting skills were excellent. She cried and said, "You said the same thing last time, but in the end, you're still suspicious of me." Zhang Yuan hurriedly swore, "If there's any falsehood in my words, may I be struck by lightning." Ding Nan wiped away her tears and asked tentatively, "Really?" Zhang Yuan nodded vigorously and said, "Absolutely. Do you still not trust Master?" Only then did Ding Nan turn her anger into joy. She turned her tears into a smile and said, "Pinger naturally trusts you. You showed your power today and got the immortal pen. Congratulations." "But soon," Ding Nan said with a worried face. "But Master, aren't you afraid of offending all the cultivation sects in the world? What if these people come to Mount Wuhua?" Zhang Yuan said proudly, "With the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade and the immortal pen, who in the world can be my opponent? Why should he be afraid of them? What's more, the cultivation world is in a mess now. How can they have time to make trouble for me? When I come out of seclusion for 10 days, I will definitely be invincible in the world." Ding Nan smiled and said respectfully, "Then I'll congratulate Master in advance and show the power of our Yin-Yang sect." Zhang Yuan laughed heartily, while Ding Nan smiled coquettishly at the side. However, the look in her eyes kept flickering, hiding a deep chill. On the other side, after Wan Jinyuan escaped from the small building, he immediately took a panacea and quickly rushed to the backyard. Wan Jinyuan rushed into a room angrily and said in a low voice, "Lu Yi, what's going on? Why did everything turn out like this?" Didn't you say that everything was under your control? Lu Yi, the former leader of the Fox Zen school, was standing by the carved wooden window and looking at the dark sky. He smiled slightly and said confidently, "Yes, everything is under my control." Wang Jinyuan said angrily, "Bull**T. Even I was hit by the immortal fall, and the Taoist assembly has become a joke. Zhang Yuan also took away the immortal pen. How can this be under your control?" Lu Yi laughed and said, "I know all of Yan Feng's plans. She has been suspecting that I'm not dead, so she tried every means to lure me out. Last time in the Gazao sect, she attacked Li Yundong in order to lure me out. This time at the Taoist assembly, if you don't get hit by the immortal fall, how can Yan Feng believe that you are an outsider who doesn't know anything? How can you get rid of the suspicion of all the sects in the future?" Wang Jinyuan was shocked and angry. "You even schemed against me?" Lu Yi smiled slightly. "I had no choice." Wang Jinyuan was about to lose his temper, but he forcibly restrained himself. He suppressed his anger and said, "Well, even if what you said makes sense, what's the matter with the immortal pen? How can you watch Zhang Yuan take the immortal pen away? Didn't you see the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade in his hand? Now that he has the immortal pen in his hand, can you imagine how powerful he will be?" Lu Yi smiled disdainfully. How powerful can a cultivator who relies on powerful magical weapons to dominate the world be? When the silver fox comes back to life, he won't be worth mentioning at all. Wang Jinyuan said angrily, "Bull**T. When you resurrect the mystical silver fox, he will have killed us all and become the king." Lu Yi laughed and said, "Don't worry, Master Wan. Didn't you notice that his disciple seemed to be in harmony with him and had evil intentions?" Wang Jinyuan was stunned and said, "That's right. How did you notice?" Lu Yi sneered and said, "There are two possibilities for Zhang Yuan to let her escape. One is that he wants to drag the enemy by himself and let Ding Nan escape. The other is that he wants Ding Nan to become the target of everyone and make her a scapegoat. Given Zhang Yuan's character, he would never do something that would harm himself and benefit others, so he must want to send his disciple to his death so that he can benefit from it." Wang Jinyuan said with a cold face, but his disciple didn't run away at all. Instead, she stayed very loyally. Zhang Yuan was deeply moved by this. Lu Yi laughed and said disapprovingly, "Master Wan, you usually boast of being resourceful. I didn't expect that you would be so smart this time. Didn't you see that when Zhang Yuan's disciple heard Zhang Yuan's order to escape, she subconsciously made a movement to escape? But she soon stopped, which means that she quickly understood Zhang Yuan's intention. At this time, if she was really loyal to Zhang Yuan, she should have escaped immediately and led everyone away. But not only did she not, but she also said something that seemed to be loyal. Hee, Zhang Yuan's disciple is very scheming. If my guess is right, Zhang Yuan will definitely test his disciple again after he goes back. If he finds that his disciple has the intention of offending him while he is seriously injured, he will definitely kill her. But if his disciple can bear it, then Zhang Yuan will definitely be in big trouble." Wang Jinyuan was quite moved when he heard this. He said, "Lu Yi, you are indeed an old fox. You are so meticulous and insightful. You seem to have seen everything with your own eyes. But why do you say that if Zhang Yuan's disciple can bear it, then Zhang Yuan will definitely be in big trouble?" Lu Yi snorted and said, "This woman is scheming. The look of enduring humiliation in her eyes is exactly the same as Yan Feng's incarnation of Mo Ashi. I have lived with Yan Feng for 9 years. How can I not see it? Zhang Yuan's disciple is so tolerant, so she must have a big plan. As long as she can bear it, Zhang Yuan will definitely not be on guard against her. And when a man is no longer on guard against a beautiful woman who is closest to him, that's when he will be in the most danger." Only then did Wang Jinyuan's anger turn into joy. He laughed and said, "Amazing, really amazing. I hope it's as you said. If the immortal pen and the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade fall into the hands of this woman, then I will be much more relieved." Lu Yi smiled slightly and said, "That's not necessarily true. I can see that this woman has excellent aptitude and is a good material for cultivation. If Zhang Yuan passes on his skills to her, with her forbearance, she may be much more terrifying than Zhang Yuan." Wang Jinyuan snorted and said with a sneer, "Zhang Yuan is a smiling tiger who hides a knife in his smile. He has always been selfish. If he would do such a thing, it would be more likely to squeeze out his disciple's Xueqi. Then he said impatiently, let's not talk about them. Let's talk about Yen Feng. This woman always spoils our plans. What should we do? Lu Yi smiled confidently and said, didn't Li Jiandong catch up with her? With his cultivation, even if Yen Feng escapes to the ends of the earth, how can she escape from his hands? Wang Jinyuan sighed and said, that had better be the case. Otherwise, if this crazy woman keeps pestering us, it will be really bad. Lu Ye's eyes suddenly became very profound. He looked deeply at the dark sky and said slowly, don't worry, the sky is about to change. While Lu Yi and Wang Jinyuan were talking in private, Chris, John, and Alba were listening to the Dongwu Pingtan on the yacht on the moat of Dongwu City while enjoying the beautiful night view of Dongwu City. Alba leaned against the antique bamboo railing, sighed softly, and said, what a beautiful night view. I suffered a lot during the day and took a sightseeing boat at night. I didn't come to China in vain. John was also enjoying the bright night view of Dongwu City with great interest. He suddenly said in surprise, Alba, do you want to go back? Alba looked at John strangely. Do you still want to stay here? Haven't you been humiliated enough by that Chinese man? John's face immediately drooped and he muttered, maybe it's really so strict to be a disciple in China. I think I shouldn't give up like this. Xueqi is right. We should be able to withstand the test. Moreover, Master has such great ability. If he casually passed it on to us, it would be quite unrealistic and naive. Alba laughed. She pressed her forehead and shook her head. You're crazy, John. You still haven't given up. As she said this, she said to Chris, hey, Chris, what do you think? At this time, Chris was sitting by the window. She was turning her head to look at the beautiful scenery outside the window and the brilliant lights on both sides of the river. The cool night wind was blowing her long golden hair, making her look particularly beautiful. Many people on the cruise ship were secretly looking at her. When Chris heard Alba's words, she turned her head, sighed softly, and said, I also think John is right. We've come all the way here. We can't give up easily. What's more, Xueqi is right. How can there be anything in this world that can be successful without going through tests and setbacks? I think this is a tribulation given to us by God. Alba suddenly cried out bitterly, you two lunatics have gone crazy. Forget it, you can go crazy. I don't want to go crazy. I have to go back. Besides, have you really made up your mind to change your nationality? Also, do you have any last words that you want me to bring back to your family? As she spoke, she suddenly saw Chris's eyes widen as she looked behind her. Alba asked curiously, what's wrong with my back? Chris stammered, 11 o'clock behind you. There was no one at the table just now. Why is there suddenly another person? Alba was a careless person. She didn't notice if there was someone sitting in the seat behind her. She looked back and saw a woman sitting with her back to her in the 11 o'clock direction. She smiled and said, maybe someone at the next table sat there. At this time, John also turned his head and said curiously, that's not right. I remember that there were only 5 people behind us. How come there are 6 now? Alba laughed and said, is it possible that not only is there someone singing for us on this yacht, but there is also someone performing magic? But as soon as she finished speaking, her eyes suddenly bulged, and she turned her head to look behind her with an expression as if she had seen a ghost. Chris and John were also dumbfounded to find that a man had appeared in front of the woman who had suddenly appeared. And this man was none other than Li Yundong. I just entered the house. Sorry. In addition, the supergroup 1 is full. Everyone, please join the supergroup 21070904449. Vote recommendation, previous page, return to table of contents, next page error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 5:15. The young spirits of Yen Feng and Li Yundong were fleeing, while the other was chasing. One was fleeing like a gust of wind, and the other was chasing like a bone needle, closely following her. No matter how hard Yen Feng's young spirit tried to escape, she couldn't escape Li Yundong's pursuit. She wanted to turn into countless avatars and escape in all directions, but just as she was about to move, Li Yundong flicked the burning thumb pot with his finger. Go to the net. Yen Fong was shocked. She knew that the burning thumb pot specialized in absorbing spiritual qi. The reason why it didn't absorb her spiritual qi now was that her yang spirit qi was huge and as condensed as steel, so the burning thumb pot couldn't absorb it. But if her yang spirit scattered into thousands of avatars, it would be equivalent to breaking a piece of ice into countless pieces, and the burning thumb pot could easily absorb all of her yang spirit avatars. Yen Fong didn't dare to split herself. She wanted to escape to the downtown area, but she was soon blocked by Li Yundong. She wanted to escape into the distance, but she couldn't escape from Li Yundong's grasp. In despair, she suddenly had an idea and got into a yacht. This time, Li Yundong didn't stop her and followed her in. Yen Fong sat in her seat, motionless. She sneered and said in a low voice, "Li Yundong, do you want to fight here?" As soon as Li Yundong sat down, he found that Chris, John and Alba were staring at him with their mouths agape. He was slightly stunned, but he quickly withdrew his gaze, as if he hadn't seen them. He said, "Yen Fong, you can't escape. Just surrender. Hand over Ao Wushuang and swear that you will never go against the Fox Zen School again. For Zi Yuan's sake, I will let you live." Yen Fong sneered and said, "You're dreaming." Li Yundong sighed and shook his head slightly. "You really don't repent? Then don't blame me for being ruthless." Yen Fong sneered and said, "I'd like to see how you will do it with so many people here." Li Yundong smiled slightly. He didn't move, but his fingers pinched a magic incantation under the table. Suddenly, colorful balls exploded in the sky one after another. They were dazzling and brilliant, like thousands of flowers blooming in the east wind at night. Except for Chris and the others who happened to see Li Yundong and Yen Fong appear on the ship, the rest of the tourists on the ship didn't notice them at all. Suddenly, they saw the fireworks outside and the colorful meteors all over the sky. They immediately stood up in amazement and walked to the deck of the yacht, pointing at the sky and laughing. For a moment, the cabin of the yacht was almost empty, leaving only Li Yundong and Yen Fong looking at each other coldly, and Chris, John, and Alba staring at them with wide eyes. The little girl who was singing Pingtan on the yacht saw that the people in the cabin had suddenly run outside to watch the fireworks, and no one was listening to her Pingtan. She immediately lost interest and ended her singing hastily. Li Yundong glanced at her and saw that the little girl in a cheongsam was holding a pipa in her arms. She wanted to put on her clothes and stop singing Pingtan, so he said, "Can you choose a song?" Hearing this, the little girl was stunned and said, "That's going to cost more." Li Yundong nodded. "Sure." The little girl immediately beamed with joy and said, "Sir, what do you want to hear?" Li Yundong glanced at Yen Fong indifferently and said, "Ambush from 10 sides." When Yen Fong saw that Li Yundong didn't take her seriously, she was so angry that her lungs almost exploded. However, she was extremely afraid of Li Yundong's strength, so she didn't dare to lose her temper, for fear that Li Yundong would suddenly explode. When the little girl heard that Li Yundong actually wanted to order ambush from 10 sides, she immediately smiled bitterly and said, "Sir, I sing Pingtan. This is not a Pingtan song." "You don't know how to play?" Li Yundong asked. The little girl saw that Li Yundong was dignified and had a deep bearing between his eyebrows. He was young and handsome, and there was a sense of arrogance in his voice. Obviously, he was not an ordinary person. She didn't want Li Yundong to look down on her, so she said, "Yes, but..." Li Yundong interrupted her and said, "You want more money? Okay, I'll give it to you." The little girl said doubtfully, "Well, can you give it to me first?" Li Yundong touched his body and suddenly frowned. Only then did he remember that he was traveling with his young spirit. How could he have a penny on him? "Li Yundong, I'll pay for you." Chris, who was standing to one side, thought quickly. She immediately took out a few red notes from her pocket and handed them to the little girl, saying, "This is the money I'll pay for him. Is it enough?" The little girl glanced at it, immediately snatched it away, and quickly hid it, as if she was afraid that Chris would regret it. She smiled brightly and thought to herself, "This young man is beautiful and has a good temperament. He even has such a beautiful foreign girl to pay for him. Alas, I really don't know what kind of background he has. If I can get such a rich husband, I won't have to worry about money for the rest of my life." The little girl's imagination ran wild, but she didn't dare to delay at all. She took out all her kung fu and began to seriously play Ambush on 10 Sides, one of the top 10 classical songs in China. Although the little girl was a little greedy, her skills were not bad. She lowered her eyes and quickly got into the mood of playing. Her 5 fingers rotated, and a string of tight and intense notes quickly jumped out of the strings. The first song of Ambush on 10 Sides, Camp, suddenly showed the tense and intense atmosphere of the first song of Ambush on 10 Sides. John and Chris, who had been watching from the side, couldn't help but become nervous along with the music. Only Alba sneered and said in a low voice, "Chris, are you crazy? How could you pay for this chauvinistic man? You're a disgrace to us feminists." Chris didn't look at her. She just whispered, "Why do I feel that there's something wrong with the two of them?" John also glared at Alba and said, "Alba, you don't want to take him as your teacher, but I do. Shut up." Alba sneered and said, "Oh John, I think before you change your nationality, you'd better think of a nice Chinese name for yourself first. I have a few good names to recommend to you. It just so happens that I've learned some Chinese in the past 2 days. What do you think? Surname Ma and name me Flatterer." John suddenly became furious and turned his head to quarrel with Alba, but Chris quickly kicked him under the table and said, "John, shut up." John glared at Alba fiercely and stopped looking at her angrily. Alba made a face at John and muttered in a low voice, "You're crazy. You have to change your nationality to take him as your teacher. If it were me, I would." As soon as she finished speaking, Li Yundong suddenly sighed and said to Yen Fong, "I'm sorry." After that, he turned his hand and grabbed Yen Fong. Yen Fong's face changed, and her body immediately changed from Yang spirit to Yin spirit. Her whole body seemed to pass through the chair behind her, trying to escape in an instant. But Li Yundong snorted coldly and moved like a shadow. In the blink of an eye, he appeared behind Yen Fong and slapped her head with his palm. His movements were so fast that it was as if Yen Fong had bumped into his palm. Yen Fong also saw the opportunity very quickly. Her body instantly shrank to the size of a palm. She abruptly turned and fled out of the window. Li Yundong smiled coldly. He pointed his finger at the window and saw that the window, which was made of vines, made a slight sound. Many small vines grew out and weaved a small net. The net was surrounded by blue light, like a vast net, waiting for Yen Fong to get into it. Yen Fong immediately turned her head and rushed to another window. Li Yunyang did the same thing and used the wood magic at will. Soon, small vines grew out of the windows of the ship and quickly weaved into a small net. Yen Fong had nowhere to go, so she immediately showed her original form. She gritted her teeth and rushed toward Li Yundong. Her ferocious eyes seemed to say, "If you don't let me live, you won't live either." Yen Fong was fierce, and her fingers were like hooks. However, Li Yundong slightly tilted his body and dodged her grasp. He put one hand on her wrist and pulled her back to her original position with a little force. Li Yundong whispered, "Sit down." Yen Fong only felt a huge force pushing her. She couldn't help bending her knees and sitting on the chair. As soon as she sat down, the chair under her made a creaking sound and many small vines grew out, wrapping around her body one by one. Seeing that she was about to be caught, Yen Fong immediately took a deep breath and wanted to shout loudly to attract others' attention. In this way, Li Yundong would not dare to use magic so unscrupulously. Li Yundong was quick to react. He immediately slapped Yen Fong with his palm, and a majestic Xueqi pressed down on her like a huge wave. Yen Fong suddenly felt suffocated. As soon as she opened her mouth, she felt a gust of wind rushing into it. Not to mention shouting, she couldn't even breathe. She suddenly coughed twice and quickly pinched a finger gesture. Her finger touched a vine on her body, and suddenly the vine ignited by itself and broke apart with a snap. Yen Fong struggled fiercely again and immediately broke free. As soon as she broke free, she suddenly exerted her strength in an almost impossible place. Suddenly, a leg flew up from under the table and kicked toward Li Yundong's lower abdomen. This kick was insidious and hidden, without warning. With the cover of the table, it was really invisible and impossible to guard against. If it had been someone else, they would have been hit immediately. However, as soon as Li Yundong felt a gust of wind, he immediately kicked out as well. However, he knew that it was impossible for him to be faster than Yen Fong at such a close distance, so he kicked the back of her foot. The angle of his foot just blocked the momentum of Yen Fong's kick. The 2 feet collided with each other with a bang. Li Yundong immediately stepped on Yen Fong's instep and slammed it on the floor. Then he used his knee to touch the inside of her leg. As long as he did this, Yen Fong would lose her center of gravity. Li Yundong then made a heavy blow. In the case of losing her center of gravity, it was impossible for Yan Fong to dodge and fight back. After all, Yan Fong was also a master who had cultivated for many years. Her reaction was also very fast. Seeing Li Yundong come to touch her inner leg, she took advantage of the moment when he squeezed in and immediately shrank her leg, and then hit back. Under the table, the two of them crossed one leg and arched the other, squeezing and pressing the other. It looked very awkward, but there was a hidden killing intent in it. The two of them did not stop moving their hands on the table, quickly and fiercely exchanging blows. The two of them grabbed, hit, pinched, grabbed, and hammered. Their arms constantly collided with each other, producing dull sounds, like the beating of a drum. At this time, the little girl who was playing ambush from 10 sides had obviously entered the state of performance. Her eyes were closed and she had quickly finished the second part of ambush. She was playing the section of The Battle of Chicken Crowing Mountain. This piece of music was intense. The fingers of the player were flying up and down, so fast that they almost left after images. The intense music happened to become the background music of the fight between Li Yundong and Yan Fong. The atmosphere was suffocating, as if two armies were fighting at close quarters, swords and spears were clashing, and the atmosphere was murderous. Chris, John, and Alba were stunned and dazzled. Chris and John had seen some incredible things about Li Yundong, so they could still bear it. Alba couldn't help but mutter, "Jesus Christ. Am I watching a movie?" After I finish, I will update the second time. Don't say that I update the first time every day. Although I only updated the first time a while ago, I made up for it the next day. Chapter 5:16. Li Yundong and Yan Fong fought fiercely in the cabin. Sometimes they used magic, and sometimes they fought with their fists and feet. Every time Yan Fong wanted to alarm others in order to protect herself, Li Yundong always had a way to press her down, so that she could only fight with him obediently. Go to the net. After fighting for a while, Yan Fong also noticed that Li Yundong deliberately wanted to consume her Xueqi and spiritual energy. As long as her Xueqi was consumed to a certain extent, Li Yundong could use the burning thumb pot to absorb all her spiritual energy and Xueqi. This was killing people with a blunt knife, cutting off pieces of flesh one by one. Although the method was not fierce, the purpose was extremely vicious. The more Yan Fong fought, the colder she became. Am I going to be defeated by this guy today after being famous for 20 years? Thinking of this, Yan Fong couldn't help but feel sad, but she was unwilling to give up. She made up her mind to fight to the death. She gritted her teeth, suddenly turned her wrist, and threw a talisman at Chris, John, and Alba, who were stunned. The talisman quickly burned in the air, like a blazing fireball. In the blink of an eye, it rushed in front of Chris, burning her face red. Damn it! Seeing that Yan Fong had been crazy enough to attack ordinary people, Li Yundong was furious. His figure flashed quickly, and he appeared in front of Chris and the others like a mountain. With a wave of his hand, he took the fireball in his palm. He clapped his hands and shattered the fireball in his palm. Suddenly, countless tiny sparks appeared on his hands, like sparks. With a wave of Li Yundong's hand, these small flames immediately rushed toward Yan Fong. Yan Fong took a deep breath and blew it out. This breath of hers was really the authentic kung fu of the Xianmen sect for more than 20 years. Her aura was vigorous and condensed, like a sharp arrow, piercing through the sparks, and still going straight to Chris and the others. Crazy and the other two felt an aura rushing towards them. It was as if a knight was galloping on the battlefield, holding a long spear with red tassels fluttering in the wind. The piercing aura seemed to be piercing through their bodies. Seeing that Yan Fong had attacked the three of them one after another, Li Yunyang became even angrier. He glared at her and a burst of gang qi burst out from his body, instantly shattering Yan Fong's qi arrows. This condensed aura was like a raging tide slapping against a mountain, surging in all directions. A gust of wind blew through the cabin, causing the hair of Chris and the others to become disheveled and unable to open their eyes. At this time, the little girl playing the pipa happened to be playing the Battle of Ninely Mountain from the ambush on 10 sides. She was either stroking or lining, sometimes strumming the strings, sometimes pushing and pulling, and her fingers were flying up and down. The music was intense, and there seemed to be the sound of horse hooves, swords, and shouts in the music. The sound was sonorous and murderous. Chris, John, and Alba had never seen such a bizarre, Hollywood blockbuster fight before. The three of them had no idea how many times they had been in front of the gates of hell just now. If it hadn't been for Li Yundong, they would have died a long time ago. Chris and the others watched the intense battle that they had never seen before. Listening to the passionate and heroic ambush from 10 sides, they were really intoxicated. Their mouths were wide open and their eyes were bulging out, as if they had seen an otherworldly immortal. Yan Fong attacked Chris and the others twice in a row and finally managed to get Li Yundong away from her. She immediately shrank her body and exploded like a fireball, turning into countless cyan lights that flew in all directions. Li Yundong's eyes suddenly widened, and his figure instantly changed from Yang spirit to Yin spirit. He flew into the air and stood there. He recited the Diamond Sutra, held the burning thumb pot in his left hand, and gently flicked the middle finger of his right hand on it. Suddenly, the burning thumb pot made a ding sound, and the surrounding air was shaken into countless ripples, spreading in all directions, as if there were sound waves visible to the naked eye. Fortunately, it was still night and Li Yundong was flying high, so no one noticed it. However, Yan Fong's Yang spirit avatars, who were fleeing in all directions, suddenly heard the sound of the burning thumb pot. Their bodies suddenly froze, and then the sound waves caught up with Yan Fong's avatars. Every time they caught up with one, they were pulled back a little. Li Yundong then flicked his finger on the burning thumb pot again. With a ding, the burning thumb pot released another layer of sound waves, pulling back some of Yan Fong's avatars that were fleeing in all directions. Yan Fong was scared out of her wits. She knew that the burning thumb pot was now like a huge fishing net, enveloping all her avatars. The closer it got, the tighter it got. As long as it got closer, Li Yundong would pull the net back. At that time, even if she wanted to fight to the death, it would be impossible. Yan Fong thought quickly. She immediately let out a scream and said loudly, "Li Yundong, do you still want to save Ao Wushuang?" Li Yunyang was stunned for a moment, but it was at this moment that Yan Fong's Yang spirit avatar immediately fled in all directions. Li Yundong was furious and shouted, "You still don't repent even when you're about to die. You're courting death." After that, he flicked the burning thumb pot in his hand. This sound shook all of Yan Fong's doppelgangers, causing them to tremble violently. No matter how far they escaped, they were pulled back again. Yan Fong was shocked and said again, "Li Yundong, are you crazy? If you kill me, how can you save Ao Wushuang?" Li Yundong snorted. He had been fooled once, so how could he be fooled again? Without saying a word, he flicked his finger again. Yan Fong only heard the tinkling of the burning thumb pot, which was like a soul-stirring bell, pulling her into the abyss again and again. Yan Fong was horrified and didn't dare to play any more tricks. She said sternly, "Li Yundong, do you want to save Ao Wushuang or catch me?" After that, Yan Fong immediately threw out the hidden Emperor's clock. Li Yundong suddenly saw the Emperor's clock being thrown by Yan Fong into the sky in an instant, drawing a purple belt of light. Yan Fong's avatars fled in all directions as if they had gone crazy. Li Yundong snorted coldly and flicked the burning thumb pot again. This time, the burning thumb pot pulled many of Yan Fong's doppelgangers to the front. As soon as these doppelgangers got within 30 feet of the burning thumb pot, they immediately turned into blue light and quickly flew into the burning thumb pot. As for Li Yundong himself, he instantly turned into a blue light and chased after the Emperor's clock. Although Li Yundong's actions were different, his speed was so fast that it seemed that he had done it at the same time. Nearly half of Yan Fong's avatars were pulled over by the burning thumb pot, and then they were quickly refined by it. The Yang spirit was equivalent to the second body of a cultivator. If half of the body was swallowed at once, the injury would be unimaginable for a cultivator. Yan Fong immediately let out a shrill scream. Her pain was no less than that of being dismembered, and her cultivation was greatly reduced. Yan Fong's angry roar came from afar. No one could hear what she was roaring, but her voice disappeared into the dark night, like a wild wolf that had escaped back into the deep mountains and wild forests, without a trace. Li Yundong's figure instantly returned to where he was. He held the burning thumb pot in one hand and the Emperor's clock in the other. His eyes flickered as he looked in the direction where Yan Fong had gone. He deeply felt Yan Fong's resentment and anger. At the last moment, Yan Fong not only threw out the Emperor's clock in an attempt to lure the tiger away from the mountain, but at the same time, she also cut off her wrist. She would rather let Li Yundong refine a large number of avatars than be caught by him. After a wild wolf was caught, in order to escape, it would even bite off its own foot. For cultivators, their power and cultivation were more important than their reputation. In order to escape, Yan Fong would rather lose half of her power. What great determination and courage did she need? I let her escape again. What a terrible opponent. After standing still in the air, Li Yundong snorted coldly to himself. Soon, his body turned into a beam of green light and flew back in the direction of Su Chan and the others. In the yacht, the little girl playing the piano had already reached the part of Xiang Wang's defeat. The rhythm was scattered and the rhythm was alternating with the close-paced sound of horses' hooves. Then she drew her 5 fingers, and the 4 strings sounded at the same time, and the music stopped abruptly. At this time, the people on the deck were still enjoying the night view, and the cabin was extremely quiet. The little girl who was playing opened her eyes, but she could no longer see Li Yundong and Yan Fong, as if they had never appeared. She couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. She looked around, but she didn't see any of them. She couldn't help but wonder, it's strange. The ship didn't stop. Where did they go? Chris and John let out a long sigh of relief, as if they had watched a thrilling Hollywood blockbuster. But they knew that the Hollywood blockbusters they had seen before were fake, but what they had seen with their own eyes was real. Chris secretly pinched her thigh hard and suddenly felt a sharp pain. She was in so much pain that she secretly grinned. Only then did she believe that everything in front of her was not a dream. Her grandmother's words suddenly echoed in her mind. If you see those cultivators one day, you must find a way to worship them as your master. Otherwise, when you are old, you will regret it like me. John opened his mouth wide, his face full of excitement and fanaticism. His expression was exaggerated, as if he wanted to shout and tell the world what he had just seen, but he didn't know how to say it. John was like a long-haired monkey scratching his ears and cheeks, dancing with joy. He said excitedly, "Chris, did you see that? I want to be an immortal, I want to be an immortal." Then he said to Alba with a face full of excitement and pride, "What do you think? Is my master powerful? Alba, I want to worship him as my master. Are you jealous?" Hardadef was proud of himself, as if the intense and covert battle just now was fought by him. Alba was stunned, as if she had been petrified. After a long time, she came to her senses. Her eyes widened as she looked at Chris and then at John. Suddenly, she spoke quickly and resolutely. "What procedures do I need to go through to change my Chinese nationality? I'll do it right away. I'm too sleepy. I'm going to sleep. I'll get up early the next morning to make up for it." Chapter 5:17. When Li Yundong returned to the small building, he found that the cultivators of various sects had already left, such as the Qingqing sect, the Qingwei sect, and the Jinshan sect. In particular, most of the cultivators of some small cultivation sects had left. Only the big sects, such as the Zhengyi school, the Chuanjin dragon sect, and the Gazao sect, still had some people left. Go to the internet. At this time, Zi Yuan and the others had also recovered from the immortal fall. Seeing Li Yundong return, Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, as well as Chao Yi and the little foxes, who were taking care of Lu Yuehong, immediately stood up to greet him. Su Chan and the little foxes looked at Li Yundong with wide eyes and asked with concern, "Did you catch her?" Li Yundong shook his head, and the little foxes suddenly sighed. Chao Yi gritted her teeth and said, "I can't believe we let this guy run away again." Zi Yuan looked worried. Second Sherbua is stubborn and can endure. If she runs away, I really don't know when she will appear again. Li Yundong also sighed and said, "At the last moment, Yan Fong would rather lose half of her strength and run away. Although she is an enemy, I still admire her very much." When Lu Yuehong, who was seriously injured, heard that Yan Fong had lost half of her strength, she couldn't help but be happy and said, "Leader, since Yan Fong has been seriously injured, I think she won't make things difficult for us in a short time." "Is that so?" As she spoke hurriedly, her injuries were immediately affected, and she coughed violently again. Chao Yi couldn't help complaining to her, "Shiji, you can only be a thief for 1,000 days. How can you guard against thieves for 1,000 days? Just rest and recuperate." Lu Yuehong forced a smile and said, "Shiji, I just want to take advantage of this period of time to search for Yan Fong's whereabouts once and for all." Hearing Lu Yuehong call Chao Yi Shiji, Li Yundong couldn't help asking, "Sherbua Lu Yuehong, Sherbua Chao Yi is only ranked 6th, not the youngest. Below her are Yi Yu and Ao Wushuang. In principle, Ao Wushuang is the youngest, so she should be called Xueqi. Why do you call Sherbo Chao Yi Xueqi? Lu Yuehong sighed and said bitterly, Leader, Yi Yu is dead and Ao Wushuang is also in danger. Now in our Fox Zen school, Chao Yi is the youngest. If I don't call her junior sister, who else should I call? Li Yundong smiled slightly and said to Chao Yi Sherbua, I'm afraid you won't be able to be the little shimmy. His words stunned everyone in the Fox Zen school. Su Chan was the most quick-witted. She suddenly looked ecstatic, grabbed Li Yundong with both hands, and said loudly, Yundong, did you save my master? Li Yundong patted her soft hand with a smile and nodded. Not bad. Everyone in the Fox Zen school was overjoyed and cheered loudly. Lu Yuehong couldn't help but be overjoyed. Junior sister has been rescued? Where is she? Chao Yi was also pleasantly surprised and couldn't help chanting the name of Buddha. Amitabha, thank God. Little Shimmy has finally been rescued. Finally, our Fox Zen school doesn't need to be supported by our leader alone. This is a joyous occasion. The little foxes rolled their eyes and looked at Li Yundong up and down, as if they wanted to see where he would take Ao Wushuang out in the next second. Li Yundong flipped his wrist and took out the fist-sized emperor's clock from his arms. He said, Ao Wushuang is inside. When we go back, we can save her. Everyone saw that the emperor's clock was purple all over, and there was a hint of gold in the purple. There were all kinds of runes and figures engraved on it. Su Chan's eyes were sharp. She saw that there was a woman whose appearance and figure were very similar to Ao Wushuang. She pointed at the image and said, This is my master. Li Yundong looked at it and said with a smile, I'm afraid so. Don't worry. You'll see your master when you go back. Su Chan looked up at Li Yundong, her eyes full of admiration and emotion. This boy had promised to save her master, and now he had done it. Chao Yi couldn't help urging, Leader, let's go back first, shall we? However, Li Yundong waved his hand and said, There's no hurry. Let me say hello to the cultivators of the other sections. After that, he walked up to Du Fei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect, cupped his hands, and said, Zhenren Du, I really didn't expect the Taoist assembly to turn out like this. Thank you for speaking up for justice at the Taoist assembly. If you need any help in the future, just let me know. Du Fei also cupped one hand in the other before his chest and said with a smile, Zhenren Li, although this Taoist assembly has turned into a farce and the immortal pen has been taken away by Zhang Yuan, you have shown great power and defeated the masters of various sections. Later, you turned the tide and drove the masters of Legoino out of the assembly. This kind of prestige will remain in the world forever. In the future, it will definitely be a popular story. Li Yundong smiled noncommittally and said, It's just an empty reputation. It's not worth mentioning. Zhenren Du. He looked at Yu Shang and Wei Qing again, cupped his hands and said, Zhenren Yu, Zhenren Wei, goodbye. At this time, Yu Shang had completely lost his temper with Li Yundong. He was convinced and cupped his hands to Li Yundong, saying, After this battle, there is no longer any objection to your reputation as the best in the world. I, Yu Shang, am convinced. However, Yu Sheng quickly changed his tone and said, But Zhenren Li, there are countless cultivation masters in the world. Each sect has a senior master who has cultivated in seclusion. I'm afraid it will be difficult for you to call yourself the best in the world. Li Yundong laughed and said, I just hope that others won't make trouble for me. I don't care if I'm first or not. Yu Sheng admired him even more. Zhenren Li, you are so open-minded. I admire you. Wei Qing's eyes widened. She quickly took out a notebook and a pen from her arms and handed them to Li Yundong, saying, Super Li, can I have your autograph? Li Yundong asked curiously, What did you call me? Wei Qing had always been afraid of the world being in chaos, so she would never stop talking without shocking people. She giggled and said, I called you Super Li. Originally, I wanted to call you Zhenren Li. As the saying goes, Zhenren Zhang was 500 years ago, and Zhenren Li will be 500 years later. In the past, Zhenren had to be conferred the title by the emperor, but now there is no emperor. Everyone calls themselves Zhenren, so it's not cool to call you Zhenren Li. So I'll just call you Super Li. Anyway, 500 years ago, Zhang Sanfeng was also known as invincible. 500 years ago, Zhang Sanfeng was Super Li, and 500 years later. Wei Qing was beaming with joy and said proudly, "Haha, in the future, if anyone asks who gave me the title of Super Li, they might mention my name. Super Li, I'm also famous like you. Haha. Super Li. Hurry up and sign. Hee hee." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Du Fei, who was beside him, also tried hard to hold back his laughter. He glared at her and shouted, "Nonsense, don't you know that people will die from flattery?" Wei Qing made a face at him and said, "What do you mean by flattery? No one in this Taoist assembly can beat Tachibana Wakako." But Li Yundong scared her to tears with one palm. "If this is not invincible, then what is?" Yu Shang said seriously, "It's not necessarily invincible in the world. At least Master is not necessarily weaker than Zhenren Li." Wei Qing rolled her eyes at him and said, "How old is Master? How old is Zhenren Li? If Li Yundong is not invincible in the world after a few more years of cultivation, you can dig out my eyes." Yu Sheng thought for a moment and nodded. "That's true." Wei Qing giggled again and handed the autograph book and pen to Li Yundong. She said with a smile, "Super Li, sign it, sign it." Li Yundong took it, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He opened it and saw his signature from last time. He smiled and said, "Didn't you sign it last time? Why did you sign it again?" Wei Qing smiled and said, "Last time was last time, this time is this time." Li Yundong signed helplessly and said as he signed, "Why did you bring this to the Taoist assembly?" Yu Shang, who was standing to one side, tried hard to hold back his laughter and said, "She said that she wanted to collect the signatures of famous cultivators in the world and sell them in the future." Wei Qing immediately stepped on his foot and glared at him fiercely. "You talk too much." As she said this, she turned to look at Li Yundong with a smile on her face. "Super Li, you won't refuse me, will you? Shi Xiang is very stingy. Although he has money, he won't share it with me, so I have to make my own income." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "Gossip Wei is really a good idea. How creative." Wei Qing asked curiously, "What Gossip Wei?" Li Yundong also pretended to look at Wei Qing strangely. "Isn't your surname Wei?" Wei Qing quickly reacted. She smiled and said angrily, "You're the gossip." Li Yundong, Du Fei, and Yu Sheng laughed at the same time. Not far away, Zhang Ling, Zhou Ping, and the others of the Zhengyi school saw Li Yundong and Du Fei of the Chuanjin dragon sect talking happily. Zhou Ping couldn't help but sneer and say, "Humph, they really colluded together. The Chuanjin sect is really determined to go against us. I think they don't want to be the leader of the Six Sects Alliance anymore." And Super Li? Bah! I feel sick listening to this flattery. As she said this, Zhou Ping couldn't help but take a step forward and want to mock them loudly. However, Zhang Ling immediately grabbed her with one hand, shook her head at her, and said in a low voice, "Li Yundong is in the limelight now. Let's not have a conflict with him first. What's more, he turned the tide and drove away the masters of Regoino. All the sects owe him a great favor." Zhou Ping said anxiously, "But didn't Yan Feng say that he has a big conspiracy to resurrect the mystical silver fox?" Zhang Ling looked at Li Yundong with a sullen face and said, "The whole thing is just Yan Feng's empty words. Now Li Yundong is back, but Yan Feng is nowhere to be seen. It's very likely that she has hidden or been caught." Zhou Ping couldn't help but say, "That's just right. Yan Feng is also a member of our Zhengyi school. We can take this opportunity to intervene and make him lose his prestige." Zhang Ling glared at Zhou Ping and sneered. "Make him? If he insists that Yan Feng is not with him, what will you do? Force him? Can you beat him? Humph! Li Yundong has become so strong that you and I can no longer deal with him. If we go to find trouble with him now, we will be asking for humiliation." Zhou Ping gritted her teeth and said, "Then what should we do? Do we watch him, a junior, step on the head of our Zhengyi school? Humph! He is so young and already calls himself Invincible Li. If he is allowed to cultivate for another 2 years, I'm afraid that the leader of our Zhengyi school will have to salute him when he sees him. Bah, I don't admit that he is Invincible Li." Zhang Ling sneered and said, "Humph, invincible, invincible. What a good Invincible Li. Zhou Ping, you are wrong. We just have to admit that he is Invincible Li. Not only do we admit it, But we also have to publicize it and let the whole world know the prestige of Li Yundong. Zhou Ping was shocked and said, "Why? Master, aren't you boosting the morale of others and destroying your own prestige?" Zhang Ling sneered and said, "There are many cultivation sects in the world. How can they be willing to let Li Yundong suppress them? What's more, although Yan Feng's words have no evidence, the most terrible thing in the world is groundless rumors. I believe that it won't be long before the Fox Zen School becomes the target of public criticism, and Li Yundong will definitely become the most suspicious person. As for the title of Invincible Li, ha ha ha, I'm afraid that it will arouse the suspicion of the cultivators of all sects." Zhou Ping's eyes lit up and she said to Zhang Ling, "Master, you are the best. What a good plan." Zhang Ling waved her sleeves and shouted in a low voice, "Li Yundong is also a rare talent. He is not inferior to Wang Yuanshan back then, but it's a pity that he is always against our Zhengyi school. Hurry up and take Zhang Tianhe and Wang Lingfei back. Don't waste any more time here." Zhou Ping nodded in agreement and picked up the unconscious Zhang Tianhe. Then she asked her younger sister, who was not far away, to pick up Wang Lingfei. Zhang Ling smiled and said to Li Yundong, "Invincible Li, goodbye. Thank you for taking care of the Taoist assembly this time. Zhengyi school will remember it." After that, she quickly turned into a green light and left with the disciples of the Zhengyi school. Everyone in the Fox Zen school suddenly laughed and said to Li Yundong, "Congratulations, leader. Zhengyi school also recognizes leader's invincible name. This is really a happy event for our Fox Zen school." Li Yundong didn't comment. His face was neither surprised nor happy. He looked in the direction in which Zhang Ling and the others had left, and his eyes flickered. After a long time he said, "Let's go back. It's time to rescue Ao Wushuang, who has been trapped for a long time." Yesterday's second night watch, today's 2-night watch as usual. Chapter 5:18. When Li Yundong and the others returned home, the little foxes couldn't help cheering as soon as they entered the house. They went to see the net. 7K. OM. We're finally back. Su Chan sighed with emotion and looked around at the familiar environment. She felt that the Taoist assembly had only lasted for a day, but it felt as long as a century for them. Li Yundong handed Zhou Qin, who was on his back, to Wan Hongling and told her to help Zhou Qin apply medicine. Then he began to prepare to rescue Ao Wushuang. This time, the Taoist assembly had been full of twists and turns. Although it was dangerous and tortuous, Li Yundong had turned the tide with his extraordinary cultivation and strength. In the end, Xueqi had returned and Yan Feng had been dragged out of the Fox Zen school. Although she had escaped in the end, her cultivation had declined by half, and it would be difficult for her to pose a threat in a short time. Most importantly, Li Yundong had saved Ao Wushuang, which was undoubtedly exciting news for the Fox Zen school. Whether it was Su Chan or the little foxes, when they saw Li Yundong fighting against the heroes at the Taoist assembly, they all wanted to help him, but their cultivation quotients were too low. Not only could they not help, but they would also become a burden. In fact, except for Li Yundong, there was no one in the Fox Zen school who could fight. This was really a joke. However, Ao Wushuang had become famous early, and she was extremely strong in fighting methods. She used to be known as the top master of the Fox Zen school. Once she escaped, the strength of the Fox Zen school would improve. Li Yundong took out the Liuhe sword and was ready to cut the emperor's clock. But just as he was about to make a move, he saw Zi Yuan frowning thoughtfully. He couldn't help but stop and ask, "Zi Yuan, what's wrong? Is there something wrong?" Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, frowned. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but she swallowed it. Seeing her hesitation, Li Yundong smiled and said, "If you have something to say, just say it. Is there anything else we need to say?" Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, "Actually, it's nothing. I'm thinking about what Shibui Yan Feng said." Li Yundong was stunned for a moment, but soon he laughed again. He said, "Are you worried that we will want to resurrect the mystical silver fox?" She quickly looked at Su Chan, Xueqi, and the others of the Fox Zen school and said, "I believe that you are not such a person, but..." Su Chan was clever and immediately said, "Sister Zi Yuan, as long as I'm with Yundong, I'll be very happy. I'll do whatever he does, and I won't do anything he doesn't want me to do." As she spoke, she took Li Yundong's hand with a smile and said coquettishly, "Isn't that right, leader?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. With a straight face, he pretended to be angry and said, "I told you not to cause trouble." "Have you been obedient?" Su Chan's face fell. She lowered her head and rubbed the hem of her shirt with her fingers. "I didn't do it on purpose," she muttered. Xueqi, who was standing to one side, also said seriously, "Zhenren Ziyuan, please don't worry. The mystical silver fox has been dead for more than 1,200 years. Let alone whether you want to resurrect her or not, even if you want to, where can you find her soul? Besides, the times have changed. What can we do after the resurrection of the mystical silver fox? Our Fox Zen school has been excluded for thousands of years. Now that Li Yundong has been the leader, it's time for us to turn over a new leaf and rebuild the reputation of the sect. How can we do such a heinous thing?" Zi Yuan smiled gently and said, "Then I'm worrying too much." Seeing that Zi Yuan was no longer entangled in this matter, Su Chan didn't want the two sides to have a conflict because of the mystical silver fox and separate from this life. She said to Li Yundong, "Hurry up and save my master. I miss her so much." When Xueqi of the Fox Zen School saw that Zi Yuan didn't pursue the matter any further, she was relieved and focused on Li Yundong. Only Wan Hongling, who was standing to one side, knew her Xueqi the best. If Zi Yuan had a doubt in her heart, she would never give up until she figured it out. Moreover, it was impossible for Chao Yi's words to dispel her doubts. Wan Hongling quietly reached out to pull the corner of Zi Yuan's clothes and winked at her. Zi Yuan glanced at her and shook her head slightly, indicating that she should not speak. If there was something to say, they could talk about it when they got back. Wan Hongling understood, nodded, and looked at Li Yundong. Li Yundong threw the emperor's clock in front of him, and then controlled the Liuhe sword to instantly chop at the emperor's clock. Dang! The glass sky emperor coiling bell trembled violently, then it emitted bursts of purple light. Faint figures appeared on the glass sky emperor coiling bell one after another. Su Chan's eyes were sharp. She pointed to one of them and said in surprise, "That's my master." The little foxes also chirped one after another. "Oh, I see youngest martial uncle. Thank God. I hope she's fine. But if this is Xueqi, who are the others?" The little foxes were suddenly stunned and looked at each other. Zi Yuan also suddenly frowned and said quickly, "Li Yundong, stop." But it was too late. The Liuhe sword slashed down again. With a clang, the emperor's clock shook violently. With a crack appeared at the top. In an instant, an intense and dazzling seven-colored light burst out from within. Then, beams of green light flew out from within, like countless meteors flying in all directions. In an instant, there seemed to be a typhoon in the living room, and the tea table in the living room was almost blown away. Su Chan and the others were dumbfounded. They were all blown away by the wind. Li Yundong's Xueqi was powerful. In the eyes of others, the hurricane was so powerful that they couldn't open their eyes, but in his eyes, it was just a breeze. He also widened his eyes and thought to himself, "Oh no!" The others sealed in the glass sky emperor clock had also been released. Damn it, I was thinking about Ao Wushuang getting out of trouble. Why didn't I think of this? In an instant, Li Yundong took out the burning thumb pot in his hand and was about to use it to catch the people who had escaped. But just as he was about to move his finger, he suddenly remembered that if he had also sucked Ao Wushuang into the burning thumb pot, what would he do? The burning thumb pot was not like the emperor's clock. It was a powerful magical weapon of sealing, and it specialized in restraining Ao Wushuang's demons and ghosts. It was a big furnace. If someone was caught in it, they would be directly refined. There would be no residue left, and they wouldn't even have a chance to reincarnate. As Li Yundong hesitated, the scattered light of the emperor's clock disappeared in an instant. After a while, the purple halo of the emperor's clock disappeared little by little, and it fell to the ground with a clang. Li Yundong smiled bitterly in his heart. This is good. The personal magical weapon of Yi Fashion, a great cultivator in the period of Emperor Xuanzong of Tang, has been destroyed. Moreover, who knows what kind of divine being is sealed in this powerful magical weapon? Zi Yuan couldn't help but widen her eyes. She subconsciously wanted to ask Li Yundong to use the burning thumb pot, but when she saw Li Yundong take out the burning thumb pot and was about to flick it, he couldn't help but stop moving. Zi Yuan thought for a moment and immediately knew Li Yundong's scruples. She couldn't help stamping her feet secretly and saying, "Damn it, I didn't expect to release so many sealed cultivators after Ao Wushuang. I don't know how many good people and how many bad people are among them." Soon, Su Chan, Ruan Hongling, and the others also understood the key. For a moment, the living room was silent. They all looked at Li Yundong with their mouths agape, not knowing what to do. The little foxes looked at each other, and the joy of Ao Wushuang's escape instantly disappeared. Su Chan's eyes were wide open, but she couldn't help but burst into laughter. Li Yundong glared at her and said, "What are you laughing at?" Su Chan giggled and said, "Yundong, it turns out that you can also cause trouble. I thought I was the only one who could." After that, the little foxes also giggled. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He shook his head helplessly and said, "This is really a mistake. I didn't expect such a situation to happen." Zi Yuan also smiled bitterly and said, "Even a wise man will make a mistake. This is also something that can't be helped. But where's Ao Wushuang? Why don't I see her?" Everyone immediately began to search around, but when they were looking around, they heard a faint sigh next to them. A beautiful woman wearing a crimson palace-made dress appeared in front of them. Su Chan's eyes widened, and a look of ecstasy appeared on her face. She stared at the woman in a daze for a while, and suddenly burst into tears. She threw herself into the woman's arms and shouted, "Master!" Li Yundong saw Ao Wushuang standing there gracefully. Her black hair was like a dark cloud falling down. Although she had been sealed for a long time, once she was released, she was still as beautiful as ever. There was a cold and arrogant temperament all over her body. Ao Wushuang hugged Su Chan tenderly and stroked her hair with one hand. She quickly looked around. When she saw that she was in a modern house and that all the members of the Fox Zen school were here, she couldn't help but be stunned. But soon she saw that Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling were also next to her, and they seemed to get along well with everyone. She couldn't help but show a look of surprise on her face. But when Ao Wushuang's gaze fell on Li Yunyang, her eyes suddenly lit up. She was so surprised that she opened her mouth wide and couldn't help pushing Su Chan away from her arms. She widened her eyes, took 2 steps forward, and said tentatively, You are." Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Senior Ao Wushuang, we meet again." At this moment, Ao Wushuang almost thought that the young man in front of her, who was in his prime, was tall, and at the same time exuded an elegant and calm master temperament, was Wang Yuanshan. But when she heard Li Yundong's voice, she suddenly came to her senses. She took a deep breath and looked Li Yundong up and down. She said in surprise, "I haven't seen you for a few months. Your cultivation has actually improved so much. Isn't this too exaggerated?" Chapter 519. Li Yundong smiled but didn't say anything. He remembered that when he had been taught a lesson by Ao Wushuang in the past, he hadn't been able to fight back at all. But now, with the burning thumb pot in his hand, he could completely defeat Ao Wushuang. What's more, he also had the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King, which was the nemesis of all demons and gods in the world. Go to the internet. 7K. Oath M. Ao Wushuang looked Li Yundong up and down, and her eyes were shining. She nodded to herself and couldn't help saying, "Yes, it's as I expected. Chaner, you found a good partner." Su Chan held Li Yundong's arm with both hands, her face full of pride. She raised her little face high and said with a smile, "Of course." Li Yundong said with a smile, "Senior Ao Wushuang, how are you in the Emperor's clock? I heard from Chaner that you were injured before you were sealed. Are you okay?" Ao Wushuang smiled and said, "If first Xueqi hadn't sealed me with the Emperor's clock, I would probably have died. My soul would have been sucked clean by the threaded hairpin of soul traversal. But she used the glass sky Emperor's clock to seal me, which saved my life. Don't worry, if the threaded hairpin of soul traversal doesn't suck souls, this injury is nothing at all." At this time, Su Chan hurriedly said to Ao Wushuang as if she was showing off a treasure, "Master, I have a lot of things to tell you. First, the one who attacked you was not great-uncle Moashi, but Yen Fong. Second, Yundong is now the leader of our Fox Zen school. Third, Yundong has seriously injured Yen Fong's yang spirit. Now her cultivation has been reduced by half, so she is no longer a threat to us. No matter which of these three things, Yan Fang was extremely surprised. She looked at Li Yundong and said with a slight smile, "It seems that this will be a very long story." Li Yundong also smiled and said, "I'm going to make dinner. Let's talk while we eat." When the little foxes heard this, they immediately cheered. The leader is going to cook. Hooray! There will be delicious food. Ao Wushuang saw that the little foxes of the Fox Zen school were all very supportive of Li Yundong, and their intimate expressions were from the bottom of their hearts. Obviously, they liked this leader very much. Especially when they heard that he was going to cook, they were even more surprised than when they saw her escape. She couldn't help but be more curious and muttered to herself, "What kind of magic does Li Yundong have?" Su Chan rolled her eyes, as if she knew what her master was thinking. She said with a smile, "Master, do you want to know why Yundong is so popular?" Ao Wushuang pretended to be angry and glared at her. "You are so clever that you know everything. Tell me." Su Chan moved closer to Ao Wushuang's ear mysteriously and whispered, "Because the food he cooks is very delicious, and the food you cook is terrible." "No, that's not right. You don't even know how to cook. You only know how to buy hard and cold flatbread for me." After saying that, the little girl giggled and ran away. Ao Wushuang immediately frowned and said, "Evil disciple, say it again. I've just got out of trouble, and you want to fight with me?" Su Chan laughed, hid behind Li Yundong, and made a face at Ao Wushuang. Ao Wushuang was so angry that she laughed. Chao Yi and the injured Lu Yuehong also came over and took Ao Wushuang's hand. They couldn't help laughing and said, "Little Shimmy, you finally got out of trouble. We were so worried." Ao Wushuang's face was cold but her heart was warm. She couldn't help but feel warm in her heart. She also took Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong's hands and said with a smile, "Shiji, why are there only the two of you? Where are the others? Where is Sherbua?" It would have been better if she hadn't said it, but Lu Yuehong immediately burst into tears. She choked and said, "Eldest Shiji Ao Wushuang, second Shiji Gufeng, third Shiji Zhuang Yiting, fifth Shiji Zhang Sun Hong, and seventh Shiji Yi Yu, they have all passed away." Ao Wushuang was shocked. They are all dead? Then what about Sherbua? How is he? He is very powerful. He shouldn't have. Lu Yuehong cried. Our leader was attacked by Yan Fang and then besieged by cultivators of various sections. In the end, he also passed away. Ao Wushuang felt as if she had been struck by lightning. Her body trembled violently, and she stood there for a long time without saying anything. Chao Yi sighed and said to Ao Wushuang, "If Li Yundong hadn't arrived at that time, I'm afraid that our Fox Zen school would have been in trouble." Seeing that they were talking gloomily, Li Yundong said, "Don't mention the past. Let's talk about something happy. What do you want to eat tonight? If you want to say something, say it quickly." Su Chan also smiled and said, "Yundong, whatever you cook is delicious. We'll eat whatever you cook." The little foxes also said, "Yes, leader, hurry up and make something to eat. The Taoist assembly has been going on for a whole day, but we haven't eaten anything except tea. We're so hungry that our chests are sticking to our backs." Li Yundong smiled and said, "I'll know what to cook if you guys order." Lu Yuehong also smiled through her tears and said, "Leader, you can do whatever you want." Li Yundong rolled up his sleeves and said loudly, "Well, I'll make the 4 famous dishes of the Fox Zen school today." When everyone heard this, they immediately exclaimed in unison, "No!" Li Yundong laughed and said, "Aren't you supposed to eat whatever I cook?" Su Chan scolded him with a smile. "You're so annoying. This doesn't count." Ao Wushuang asked curiously, "The Taoist assembly has been held? What are the 4 famous dishes of the Fox Zen school? Why don't we know about them?" Su Chan pulled Ao Wushuang to the side with a smile and said, "Master, listen to me slowly." As she spoke, she began to talk about how she had seen Ao Wushuang being sealed by Yan Fang, how she had escaped down the mountain, and how Li Yundong had fought against the major sects on Mount Tianlong. She spoke eloquently along the way, and there were many exaggerated and beautiful words in it. Li Yundong, with his cultivation quotient, blushed a little and immediately went into the kitchen. Seeing that the Fox Zen school was full of joy, Yuan Hongling couldn't help turning her head to look at Zi Yuan. She saw that Zi Yuan was still lowering her head, frowning and looking worried, as if she was worried about something. Yuan Hongling whispered, "Shiji Zi Yuan, What are you thinking about? Zi Yuan said in a deep voice, I'm thinking. Who exactly is locked up in the Emperor's clock? Ruan Hongling smiled and said, Why don't we ask Ao Wushuang later? Zi Yuan nodded. She had a faint bad feeling in her heart, but at the moment, the atmosphere of the Fox Zen school was rarely happy and lively, so she didn't say it out loud and spoil the mood. After Li Yundong prepared a table full of food, a group of people sat down at the table. Even Zhou Qin was helped up by Li Yundong and sent to the table. Li Yundong was elected to sit at the head of the table. Zi Yuan sat in the first seat on the left, followed by Ruan Hongling, Zhou Qin, and the little foxes. On the other side were Ao Wushuang, Chao Yi, Lu Yuehong, Su Chan, Ling Yu, and the others. Li Yundong saw that everyone was gathered together. The Fox Zen school hadn't been so lively for a long time. He couldn't help laughing and saying, Although I didn't get the immortal pen in the Taoist assembly, in my opinion, I found Senior Ao Wushuang again. This is far better than getting 10 good powerful magical weapons. Everyone agreed in unison. For a moment, the table was full of laughter and laughter. From Ao Wushuang to Zi Yuan, from Su Chan to the little foxes, all of them were stunning beauties. This table was really full of blooming flowers, and all the beauties were competing for beauty. When the meal was getting lively, Ao Wushuang saw that Zi Yuan, who was sitting opposite her, was frowning, as if she was thinking about something. She couldn't help but ask with a smile, Zi Yuan, what are you thinking about? Ao Wushuang had heard from Su Chan what had happened these days. She also knew that if it hadn't been for Zi Yuan, the Fox Zen school would have been razed to the ground. In addition, Zi Yuan was one of the closest people to Wang Yuanshan, so she had a much better impression of Zi Yuan. Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, Senior Ao Wushuang, I have a question to ask you. Ao Wushuang smiled and said, Go ahead. Zi Yuan asked, Senior, do you know who else is locked up in the Emperor's clock? Ao Wushuang was stunned for a moment and couldn't help frowning. What's wrong? Was there anyone else who was released? Seeing that this matter had already been revealed, Li Yundong couldn't help coughing and saying with a wry smile, It's my fault. If I hadn't been reckless, I wouldn't have let anyone else out. Ao Wushuang glanced at Li Yundong. She knew that Li Yundong was taking care of her own face. The Emperor's clock was Yi Fashion's powerful magical weapon, and Yi Fashion was one of the great cultivators of the Tianbao period. How could his powerful magical weapon be a joke? If he didn't split it open, how could he release the people sealed inside? But once it was split open, the sealed people would naturally run out. Ao Wushuang thought to herself, Chana really has good taste. Li Yundong's cultivation is so high now, but he can still put down his pride and cook for her. He's so considerate and meticulous when he talks. Not bad, not bad. Ao Wushuang said seriously, Leader, you don't have to excuse me. All of this happened because of me. If I hadn't believed Chana, I wouldn't have been attacked by Yan Feng, and these things wouldn't have happened. Leader, don't worry. I will take responsibility for the whole thing. Seeing that Ao Wushuang was blaming herself, Su Chan immediately said anxiously, No, I didn't make it clear. Master, I don't blame you. Ao Wushuang touched Su Chan's head with a smile and said, It's none of your business, fool. Zhou Qin, who had been silent all this time, suddenly smiled and said, But I don't think so. If Senior Ao Wushuang hadn't been caught, Li Yundong wouldn't have gone to Mount Tianlong, and everything that happened later wouldn't have happened. How could there be Super Li today? Everyone laughed when they heard this, and Zi Yuan also smiled. This is the cycle of cause and effect. Ao Wushuang smiled and went back to the topic. She said, When I was sealed by Yan Feng, my 6 senses were almost completely sealed. I felt as if I had been poured with cement. When I came through, I was already here, so. She smiled and said to Zi Yuan, I really don't know who is locked up in the Emperor's clock. Seeing Zi Yuan's worried face, Li Yundong couldn't help saying, Zi Yuan, don't think too much. Even if some demons and ghosts are released, I'll go and catch them again. Zi Yuan bit her lip and looked like she wanted to say something but hesitated. Seeing this, Ao Wushuang said, Zi Yuan, if you have anything to say, you can say it directly. Zi Yuan thought for a moment. She glanced at Li Yundong and said softly, The catastrophe that Yan Feng mentioned. Could it have something to do with this? This sentence stunned everyone at the table. For a moment, the dining room was quiet, and no one spoke. Li Yundong's heart also skipped a beat. He thought to himself, if the so-called catastrophe of the cultivation world is because I released the cultivators who don't know good and evil sealed in the Emperor's clock, then it would be too tragic. Chapter 520. While Li Yunyang and the people of the Fox Zen School were happy about Ao Wushuang's escape, they were also worried about the cultivators who had been released from the Emperor's clock. Most of the cultivators of the other sects had already returned to their sections. They went to see the net. Among them, Zhang Zuini and the others had been brought back to the Qingyang Palace by his fellow disciples, Qian Tong and Zhao Ping. Before they entered the mountain gate, they shouted loudly, "Someone, come here, come here." It was already late at night. As soon as the two of them shouted, the birds in the mountains immediately flew away and the chickens and dogs in the mountains barked. Several Taoists rushed down quickly and said, "Why are you shouting in the middle of the night? Who is it?" But when these Taoists saw Zhao Ping and Qian Tong, they immediately laughed and said, "Haha, it's you two. Is the Taoist assembly over? Where's Xixiang? How is he?" The man who was speaking was suddenly hit by the shoulder of the Taoist next to him. He immediately reacted and saw that Zhao Ping and Qian Tong's faces were gloomy, especially Zhao Ping, who was carrying a person on his back. His head was hanging down and leaning on his shoulder, and it was unknown whether he was alive or dead. Although his face could not be seen clearly, even a fool could guess who it was. The Taoist's heart suddenly skipped a beat and he asked tentatively, Is this Xixiang?" They took a closer look and saw Zhang Zuini gritting his teeth and lying on Zhao Ping's back with his eyes closed. He was motionless, and they didn't know whether he was dead or alive. At this time, the Taoists suddenly panicked and ran inside. After opening the mountain gate, they shouted all the way, "Oh no! Something has happened to the young master." The Qingyang Palace was the #1 Taoist temple in western Sichuan. It was full of incense and there were many Taoists. As soon as this man shouted, many Taoists immediately came over. They all surrounded him and said at once, "Oh, what happened to Xixiang? Did he fail in a fight with others?" "I don't know, but Xixiang is holding the San Huang sword. Which son of AB*TCH can defeat him?" "That's right. Could he have fallen into someone's trap?" "Well, it's possible." Seeing that these Taoists had blocked their way, Zhao Ping and Qian Tong couldn't help shouting angrily, "Get out of the way, get out of the way. What are you doing here? Quickly go and get the sect leader and martial uncle hall master. Hurry up." After that, they came to the backyard of the Sanqing Hall and placed Zhang Zuini in a small room. While feeding him the elixirs brought by other brothers, they looked at Zhang Zuini's complexion nervously. The other Taoist priests of the Qingyang Palace all craned their necks to look at the situation inside the house. They were all full of suspicions, but none of them dared to speak. For a moment, the backyard was so quiet that only the sound of insects in the night could be heard. After a while, someone suddenly said in a low voice, "The head of the sect is here, and so is martial uncle hall master." As they spoke, the Taoist priests made way for them. A yellow-faced, green-bearded Taoist priest of medium build, dressed in a navy blue Taoist robe, and a tall Taoist priest with tiger-like eyes and a full beard, dressed in a dark green Taiji Taoist robe walked in. The yellow-faced, green-bearded Taoist priest walked in front. His appearance was quite similar to Zhang Zuini's. He was Zhang Tongtian, the head of the Qingqing sect. The Taoist next to him was a little behind him. He was Zhang Xueqi, the head of the Qingyang Palace. Although Zhang Tongtian was not tall, he had a square face. There were deep wrinkles between his eyebrows, and the wrinkles on the corners of his mouth were deep and full of majesty. He glanced around and shouted coldly, "What are you all doing here? Go back. Do you think you're watching a show?" After being shouted at by Zhang Tongtian, these Taoist priests suddenly became solemn. After saying goodbye to Zhang Tongtian and Zhang Huashui, they whispered to each other and slowly left. Zhang Huashui, the head of the Qingyang Palace, was Zhang Zuini's uncle. He had brought Zhang Zuini up since he was a child, so he doted on Zhang Zuini very much. When he saw that everyone had left, he couldn't help but step forward quickly and check Zhang Zuini up and down before Zhang Tongtian did. A trace of anger suddenly flashed in his eyes, and he said coldly in standard Sichuan dialect, "Who did this? We are all fellow Taoists. Who doesn't know how to show mercy?" Zhang Tongtian also fixed his eyes on Zhang Zuini. There was both grief and pity in his eyes, But more than that, there was anger at Zhang Zuani's failure. He sneered and said, "What a good-for-nothing. You deserve it. What's there to ask?" However, Zhang Huashui acted as if he hadn't heard it. He glared at Zhao Ping and Qian Tong, who were still standing there. Zhang Huashui looked fierce. With a glare, the Taoists of the Qingyang Palace would tremble and their legs would go soft. Zhao Ping and Qian Tong were no exception. They looked at each other and urged each other to speak. Zhang Huashui shouted angrily, "You two sons of B*cheese. Qian Tong, you tell me." Zhao Ping let out a sigh of relief, as if he had escaped a disaster. However, Qian Tong told him everything that had happened at the Taoist assembly with a sad face. However, he hid the fact that Zhang Zuani had used a scheme to drive Li Yundong out of the Taoist assembly, and that Xinxiu had taken away the Sanhuang sword. He only said that Xinxiu had defeated Zhang Zuani. Hearing this, Zhang Huashui couldn't help but be furious. "You mean there was a Japanese guy who beat Zhang Zuani like this at the Taoist assembly? Damn it, where did these 3 Japanese bastards come from? I'm going to kill them." At this time, Zhang Tongtian sat down. He sat as steady as a mountain. His eyes slightly narrowed, the corners of his mouth drooped, and he asked in a very dignified manner, "Wang Jinyuan, are you just going to sit back and watch these Japanese people behave atrociously?" Qian Tong whispered, "These Japanese are too powerful. No one can beat them." Zhang Huashui couldn't help but curse angrily, "Bullshasterisk T, call them over. I can beat them with one finger." Zhang Tongtian asked again. Zhang Zuani couldn't beat them even with the Sanhuang sword in his hand? Qian Tong couldn't help but look at Zhao Ping. Qian Tong said timidly, "Shixiang Zhang was defeated before he could even pull out his sword." Zhang Huashui couldn't help but curse angrily again, "What? It must be some trick played by these Japanese people. Call them over. I'll kill them with one finger." Hearing this, Qian Tong and Zhao Ping smiled bitterly in their hearts and thought, "Where can we call them?" However, Zhang Tongtian suddenly asked, "What about the other sects?" Qian Tong whispered, "The other sections were all defeated." Zhang Huashui suddenly widened his eyes and said angrily, "Good-for-nothings, a bunch of good-for-nothings. I'm so angry." Zhang Tongtian couldn't help but widen his eyes and say in surprise, "They were all defeated? Could it be that these Japanese people humiliated our Chinese cultivation world from head to toe at the Taoist assembly?" Qian Tong and Zhao Ping couldn't help but look at each other again. At this time, Qian Tong lowered his head and refused to say anything more. Zhao Ping could only whisper, Later, Xinxiu was defeated by Zi Yuanch." Zhang Huashui and Zhang Tongtian were both stunned. Zhang Huashui nodded and said, "Well, I've seen Zi Yuan before. She's not bad. She's really good." Zhang Tongtian also nodded slightly. He stroked his beard and said, "Fortunately, our Chinese cultivation world didn't lose face in front of the Japanese. Zi Yuan did a good job. She deserves to be Wang Yuanshan's disciple." Unexpectedly, Zhao Ping whispered again, "But later, Zi Yuan was defeated by their witch, Tachibana Wakakode." Zhang Huashui and Zhang Tongtian were shocked. "What?" Zhang Huashui's eyes widened like copper bells. "Then what happened later?" Zhao Ping glanced at Qian Tong, as if he was very reluctant to say what he was going to say next. However, Qian Tong seemed to not see him. He lowered his head, like a mute gourd with its mouth cut. Zhang Huashui had a hot temper. When he saw this, he slapped his thigh and said, "You two sons of bitches want me to die of anxiety? Tell me, Zhao Ping." Zhao Ping had no choice but to say, Later, Tachibana Wakako was defeated by Li Yundong." Li Yundong? Zhang Huashui was stunned. It was as if he had heard the news that the Martians had attacked the Earth. He opened his mouth and said, "The leader of the Fox Zen school? No, it can't be. How did he defeat this Japanese girl? Tell me about it." Zhao Ping swallowed his saliva. He had to explain the fight as simply as he could. In the process, he omitted many things that were disadvantageous to Zhang Zuani, exaggerated the strength of Tachibana Wakako, and weakened Li Yundong's strength. He made the fight between the two of them extremely difficult, and in the end, Li Yundong won by luck. Zhang Huashui gnashed his teeth and said angrily, "If it weren't for the trick of the Japanese, Zhang Zuini wouldn't have been afraid of them with the Sanhuang sword in his hand. F***ck. I'm so angry. However, Zhang Tongtian didn't say a word. He stared at Zhao Ping and Qian Tong with sharp eyes. He saw that their eyes were flickering, and some things were vague. It was obvious that they were hiding something. He suddenly slapped the table, stood up and shouted angrily, "No, you're lying. Tell me everything from beginning to end. What the hell is going on? If I find out that there is even half a lie, I will kick you out." Zhao Ping and Qian Tong trembled all over. They also knew that their leader Zhang Tongtian's eyes were like torches and could see through people's hearts, but they also thought that they could get away with it and avoid this great humiliation. But now that they had been discovered by the leader, they had no choice but to explain the whole thing clearly. Zhang Huashui's mouth opened wider and wider as he listened, and his fist could almost be stuffed inside. However, Zhang Tongtian's face became darker and darker, and his eyes were full of sneers. After Zhao Ping and Qian Tong finished speaking, Zhang Tongtian sneered again and again, but he didn't say a word. Zhang Huashui laughed angrily and said, "What a good invincible Li. Good, good, there are really talented people in every generation." Zhao Ping and Qian Tong looked at each other, and Zhao Ping said in a low voice, "Shibua, I think there's something wrong with this matter." Zhang Huashui stared at him and asked, "What's wrong?" Zhao Ping said in a low voice, "Why can't so many people beat this Japanese witch?" But before Li Yundong's palm hit her, the Japanese witch admitted defeat? Why did these Japanese come here so coincidentally? Zhang Huashui frowned and asked, "What do you mean, kid?" Qian Tong also came over and whispered, "We discussed it on the way back. We all think that it might be that Li Yundong colluded with these Japanese." Zhang Tongtian couldn't help but say angrily, "What are you talking about? What's there to collude with?" Zhang Huashui sneered and said, "Xixiang, you are a gentleman. I'm afraid you don't know this kind of villain's business, do you? This son of a bitch colluded with the Japanese and then showed his power at the Taoist assembly. Hee, this son of a bitch can be said to have gained both fame and fortune. If Zhang Yuan hadn't snatched the immortal pen, humph. I'm afraid that Invincible Li would have really become Invincible Li." Zhang Tongtian frowned and said to Zhao Ping and Qian Tong, "You guys go down first." After Zhao Ping and Qian Tong left, he said to Zhang Huashui in a deep voice, "Shitty, the whole thing is not clear yet. Don't rush to a conclusion. I know Tsuini's character. He has been arrogant and conceited since he was a child. This time, he must have been defeated by this. Humph, he brought this upon himself." Zhang Huashui waved his arm and said angrily, "My nephew has been beaten like this. Even I feel sorry for him, but as his father, you don't feel sorry for him? Why was our Qingyang palace beaten to a pulp, while the evil Fox Zen school showed off its power? Humph, how can a sect full of demons be so powerful? If there's nothing fishy about it, I won't believe it. I'm going to get out of the mountain and seek justice." Zhang Tongtian looked down at the unconscious Zhang Zuini. Although he spoke harshly, Zhang Zuini was his own son after all. Especially when the matter in front of him involved the face of the Qingqing sect. He couldn't help sighing in his heart and asking, "How are you going to seek justice?" Zhang Huashui sneered and said, "How dare a little young spirit master call himself invincible? It's ridiculous. I'll let him know what a real master is like. How can I seek justice? Of course I'll fight him. My fists are justice." Zhang Tongtian couldn't help but say angrily, "Nonsense. What nonsense? Whether Li Yundong colluded with the Japanese or not, the whole cultivation world now owes him a favor. If we make a scene, what will others think of us? Besides, what if he really didn't collude with them? How can you step down in the future?" Hearing this, Zhang Huashui was stunned. He straightened his neck and said, "Then I'll go and fight with him. Is that okay?" Zhang Tongtian suppressed his anger and said, "Shitty, listen to me and bear with it for the time being. In a while, write a letter to Zhang Ling of the Zhengyi school and ask her about it. Find out what she wants and then make plans. Even if you want to take action, you don't have to rush. In a month or two, the succession ceremony of the head of the Linggong sect will be held. It won't be too late for you to make plans then. These days, we can investigate the matter clearly." Zhang Huashui thought for a moment and nodded. "Shitty, you're so thoughtful. I'll listen to you.
After that, he strode to the study next to him, wrote a few lines on the paper, and then folded the letter.
He put his hands to his lips and whistled. Suddenly, a crane landed by the window with a whoosh. Zhang Huashuai stuffed the letter into the bamboo tube and hid it under the crane's wings. Then he patted its head and said with a smile, "Well, go to Mount Longhu to find Zhang Ling of the Xueqi school. Remember to deliver the letter to her. I'll wait for your news." The crane stretched its neck and let out a long cry, as if it had understood human language. It spread its wings and disappeared into the sky in the blink of an eye. Chapter 521. Mount Longhu in Jiangxi Province, Shangqing Palace of the Xueqi School. Go to the internet. 7K. Oath M. Zhang Ling returned to the mountain with the Taoist priests and nuns of the younger generation of the Xueqi school. She sternly issued a gag order: if anyone dares to gossip, be prepared to die of old age on the mountain in the future. Although they were cultivators, these inner disciples were all young people after all, and they yearned for the outside world very much. They often gathered together to discuss which Xixiang and Shimi had gone down the mountain again, and which Xixiang and Shimi had bought a very beautiful new set of clothes outside. Zhang Ling also knew that these people usually liked to gather together and gossip when they had nothing better to do. Sometimes, a good thing could be talked about beyond recognition, and it could spread throughout the entire Xueqi school in a few minutes. Hearing Zhang Ling's scolding, the juniors of the Xueqi school secretly stuck out their tongues and dispersed one after another. Zhang Ling suddenly called out to the youngest Shimi among them and said, "Lu Feng, wait a minute." Zhang Lufeng stopped and looked back at Zhang Ling in confusion. She asked curiously, "Shibua, what's the matter?" Zhang Ling hesitated for a moment and said, "Call your master over later. I have something to talk to him about." Zhang Lufeng smiled slightly and said, "Okay." After that, she skipped away. Zhou Ping looked at her retreating back and whispered, "Master, why did you call third Shu?" Zhang Ling sighed softly and said, "The current situation in the cultivation world can no longer be controlled without a Jinshin master. There are 3 Jinshin masters in our Xueqi school. One is Wang Yuanshan, not to mention him. The other is the leader who has been in seclusion, and the other is Zhang Liufeng's master, Zhang Kongyun." Zhou Ping opened her mouth wide and said curiously, "Zhang Kongyun. Ah, third Shu is a Jinshin master? No way, he is also a Jinshin master? You've never told me before." Zhang Ling snorted and didn't say anything. Zhou Ping immediately understood. "My master is not a Jinshin master, so why did he tell me about other Jinshin masters?" Zhang Ling's face darkened. After a while she slowly said, "Although my third Shidi has a strange temperament, he is a rare cultivation genius of our Xueqi school. He is not inferior to anyone. When he reached the Golden Body Realm, you weren't even born yet." Zhou Ping smiled awkwardly and said, "I heard that third Shibua has a strange temperament and talks too much." As she spoke, she became more and more curious. An expert in the top-level Yang spirit realm was already so powerful. What about an expert in the Jinshin realm? After a while, Zhang Lufeng came over with a man. From afar, Zhang Lufeng waved her arms and shouted, "Hey, eldest martial uncle, I've called my master over." As she spoke, she tugged on the sleeve of the person beside her. Zhou Ping took a closer look and saw that the man was extremely short, only about 1.5 meters tall. His back was bent, as if he was carrying a boulder that weighed tens of thousands of kilograms on his back. His face was full of wrinkles, and he looked so old that he seemed to have lived for hundreds of years. His eyebrows were white and long, drooping to his cheeks. The goatee under his chin was even more sparse, making him look ridiculous. Zhang Lufeng pulled Zhang Kongyun's sleeve and urged him as they walked, "Oh master, hurry up. Hurry up." Zhang Kongyun sighed and said, "You little girl, what are you doing?" "I'm busy." As soon as he walked in, Zhou Ping smelled a pungent stench. She couldn't help frowning, covering her nose and saying, "Third Shibua, what were you doing just now? It stinks." Zhang Lufeng also pinched her nose and made a face. She said with a smile, "Master was just watering the cabbages with fertilizer." Zhou Ping almost fainted. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she said, "Third Shibua, why are you doing this now? Didn't you say that you wanted to be a carpenter last time? Why are you a vegetable farmer now?" Zhang Kongyun's hands were covered in black mud. He rubbed his hands, and the mud fell down. He laughed and said, "It's not a burden to have more skills. It's not a burden to have more skills. Ha ha ha, I'll be able to make a living in the future." Zhou Ping didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Third Shebua, you're so funny. With your cultivation quotient, you can go anywhere in the world." When Zhang Kongyun heard Zhou Ping's praise, his eyebrows immediately seemed to be flying. He smiled proudly and said, "Yes, these cabbages I raised are white, big, and crisp. Ordinary people can't raise them like this." As he said this, he pulled Zhou Ping's sleeve and said with a smile, "Xueqi, come with me and have a look. You'll know once you see it." When Zhou Ping saw his black hands touching her clean clothes, she was shocked. All the hair on her body stood on end, and she quickly shrank back. But Zhang Kongyun seemed to have expected that she would shrink back. He grabbed her arm firmly and left a black 5-fingered mark on her clean sleeve. Zhou Ping was so angry that she shouted, "Third Shebua." But due to their relationship, she was too embarrassed to scold him, so her pretty face turned red. Zhang Ling couldn't stand it anymore. She sighed and said, "Third Shebua, don't torture my disciple as soon as you appear, okay? What are you doing? Let go of me. What's wrong with you?" Zhang Kongyun smiled awkwardly. He let go of her and scratched his hair with his black and dirty hands. "I'm just a little excited to see my little Xueqi. By the way, Xueqi, why did you call me?" When Zhang Ling heard the word old, her face immediately darkened. "How many times have I told you not to call me old Xueqi? I'm eldest Xueqi." Zhang Kongyun nodded and bowed, saying with a smile, "Yes, yes, old Xueqi, you're right." Zhang Ling was so angry that she almost blew smoke out of her 7 orifices. She immediately took a deep breath and thought to herself, "If it weren't for the fact that Shidi is in seclusion, who would want to deal with you? Damn it!" Zhang Ling suppressed her anger and told him what had happened at the Taoist assembly. Then she said, "Third Shebua, now that Wang Yuanshan has left the sect on his back and the leader is in seclusion, the only one who can suppress Li Yundong now is you. You can't sit back and watch our Zhengi school be bullied by others." Zhang Kongyun blinked his eyes, which were as small as black beans. He suddenly turned to Zhang Lufang and asked, "Is Li Yundong really that powerful? None of the cultivators of the various sects can beat him?" Zhang Lufang couldn't help but show a strong expression of admiration and worship on her face. She nodded vigorously and said, "Yes, he's amazing. People call him Invincible Li." Invincible Li. Invincible Li? Zhang Kongyun stroked his beard and thought for a moment. He nodded slightly and said, "Oh, he reached the golden immortal phase at such a young age?" Zhang Ling was stunned when she heard this. She said angrily, "How is that possible? At best, he's at the top of the yang spirit phase." Zhang Kongyun said in surprise, "Then why does he claim to be invincible? I know of 10 Jinshin masters in the world, and there are even 5 living lightning retribution masters. I don't know if there are any living golden immortals. When he reaches the golden immortal phase, it won't be too late to call him invincible." Zhang Lufang suddenly asked, "The top 10 Jinshin masters? What are the top 10? Zhang Kongyun twirled his beard and said, "Of the top 10 Jinshin masters in the world, 3 are in the Zhengi school, 2 are in the Chuanjin Dragon sect and the Qingqing sect, and the other 3 are scattered in the Jinshan sect, Luguan Taoist sect, and the Donghua sect. Well, these 10 people can easily defeat any Yang spirit master. Li Yundong is overestimating himself. How dare he claim to be invincible in the Yang spirit phase?" Zhang Ling sneered and said, "He reached the top of the Yang spirit phase at such a young age. Who knows how far he will go in the future?" Zhang Kongyun tilted his head and thought for a moment. He said, "Well, let's talk about it when he reaches this phase." After that, he turned around and was about to leave. Zhang Ling hurriedly stopped him and said anxiously, "Third Shudi, don't you have an attitude?" Zhang Kongyun turned his head and asked curiously, "What attitude?" Zhang Ling said angrily, "Are you just going to watch a junior bully us?" Zhang Kongyun smiled and said, "Really? Why don't I think so? Come and find me when he dares to bully Mount Longhu." After saying that, he shook his head and walked away slowly. Zhou Ping wiped the dirty handprints on her sleeves and complained to Zhang Lufang, "Why is your master like this? He's so annoying." Zhang Lufeng smiled at Zhou Ping and said cautiously, Shiji, don't you know his temper? Zhou Ping snorted and said to Zhang Ling, Master, what should we do? Zhang Ling's face was gloomy. She gritted her teeth and thought to herself, this old man, I knew he was unreliable. Damn it! After a while, Zhang Ling snorted. Just as she was about to speak, a clear cry of a crane suddenly came from the sky. After a while, a crane suddenly flapped its wings and stopped not far away. When Zhang Lufeng saw the elegant and beautiful crane, she immediately ran over with a smile, put her arms around the crane's neck, and said with a smile, it's so strange. Why is there a crane here? Zhang Ling frowned slightly and said to Zhou Ping, go over and have a look. Zhou Ping walked over and observed for a while. She saw that there was something tied to the crane's wings. She opened the crane's wings and took a look. Then, she took out a small bamboo tube and handed it to Zhang Ling. Zhang Ling glanced at the note inside and couldn't help but sneer. Zhou Ping leaned over and couldn't help asking, Master, what is this? Zhang Ling sneered and handed the note in her hand to Zhou Ping. She snorted and said, see for yourself. Hey, Zhang Xueqi hasn't changed at all. He's still so overbearing. Zhou Ping glanced at it and saw that the words on the note were rough, and the tone was full of arrogance and condescension. She couldn't help but be furious. Who does the Qingqing sect think they are? 1,000 years ago, they were just a branch of our Zhangyi school. How dare they point their fingers at us like this? At this time, Zhang Ling had already calmed down. She suddenly smiled and said, they want an answer. Hey, okay. Although Zhang Xueqi is rude, it's impossible for him not to know that such wording will provoke a fight between the two families. I think he wants to make trouble for Li Yundong, and his Xixiang, Zhang Tongtian, is a cautious and well-behaved person. He must have suppressed Zhang Xueqi and asked him to find out the truth before making trouble for Li Yundong. So, Zhang Xueqi sent such an arrogant letter over. Zhou Ping asked tentatively, then Master, what should we do? Zhang Ling laughed and said, Zhang Xueqi is one of the top 10 Jinshin masters in the world. If he wants to make trouble for Li Yundong, why don't we help him? Reply to him. Zhou Ping asked again, should I go back and forth? Zhang Ling couldn't help but say angrily, nonsense, do you need me to do such a small thing myself? Zhou Ping was scolded, but she wasn't angry. Instead, she took the letter and left with her eyebrows raised. Zhang Lufeng looked at Zhou Ping strangely, and then couldn't help looking at Zhang Ling. She couldn't understand at all. Why did her Sherbua and Shiji have to make things difficult for Li Yundong? Zhang Lufeng blinked her eyes and thought to herself, Amateus, I heard that Zhang Xueqi of the Qingqing sect is known as the fierce Zhang Fei of the cultivation world. If he makes trouble for Li Yundong, there will be a good show to watch. Chapter 522. Just as the forces of the various sects were surging in secret, there was a calm and peaceful atmosphere in the Fox Zen school. Go to the internet. Early in the morning, Ao Wushuang woke up from her meditation. She let out a soft breath, and a stream of white qi spurted out from her red lips like a sharp arrow. It went straight to the wall before dispersing. The breath of the beauty was like fragrant musk, and for a moment, the room was filled with a delicate and seductive atmosphere. Ao Wushuang opened her eyes and looked around. She saw a 40-inch plasma TV hanging on the wall. Just now, she had spurted out a breath, and the TV, which was more than 4 meters away from her, was covered with a layer of mist. Next to the TV was a luxurious stereo, and under her was a spacious and luxurious bed. The whole room was decorated fashionable and gorgeous. Ao Wushuang couldn't help sighing to herself. I've been cultivating in seclusion all my life. I used to live with a wooden bed as my home. I didn't expect to live in such a luxurious place now. It's really unusual. While she was sighing with emotion, she suddenly saw a small piece of the mist on the TV screen across from her. She couldn't help laughing in her heart and said lightly, "Come out. Don't hide." There was silence in the room. Ao Wushuang snorted and said, "Look back. You've rubbed the TV yourself. Don't pretend." At this time, a figure appeared in the room. This person was smiling sweetly, her eyes rolling in her eye sockets, and her eyebrows were full of mischief. Who else could it be but Su Chan? Su Chan said with a smile, "Master, you're so perceptive." Ao Wushuang snorted and said, Is it necessary for us to do this?
What's the matter that can't be said directly?
And you even use the invisibility skill to come here? Are you afraid that Li Yundong won't let you come to see me? Su-chan quickly waved her hand and hurriedly explained. No, Yundong is very kind to me. Don't talk nonsense. Ao Wushuang looked at Su-chan with a strange expression. Then why are you sneaking around? Could it be that you want to have a battle of wits with me again? Su-chan sat next to Ao Wushuang with an obsequious smile on her face. She took her arm and said coquettishly, Master, how dare I fight with you? Who in the world is as beautiful as you? Who is as intelligent as you? You are truly the most beautiful woman in history, the most intelligent. At first, Ao Wushuang listened with a smile, but later, she couldn't help but have goosebumps all over her body. As the saying goes, flattery never works. Even so, he couldn't stand being filmed like this. Ao Wushuang glared at him and said, Cut the crap. What's the matter? Tell me now or I'll kick you out. Su-chan suddenly looked aggrieved and said with tears in her eyes, Master, you just got out of trouble, and now you want to kick me out? Seeing that her tears came out of nowhere, Ao Wushuang didn't know whether to laugh or cry.
She said, You wicked girl, I'll tell you the door.
Su-chan smiled through her tears and wiped her eyes with both hands. It was as if the weather in April had changed without warning.
I knew you're the best, Master.
Ao Wushuang pressed her forehead and shook her head helplessly. Why are you beating around the bush? Tell me quickly. Su-chan blinked her eyes, as if she had summoned up a lot of courage, and said carefully, Master, can you continue to teach me cultivation? Ao Wushuang was stunned and asked curiously, I've been away for so many days. Didn't Zi Yuan and Li Yundong teach you anything? Su-chan paused for a moment, then put on a pitiful look and said, They're all too busy. Ao Wushuang chuckled and said, It's you who refuses to learn. Now, even Zhou Qin's cultivation is almost higher than yours. When Li Yundong enforced justice on behalf of heaven, this little girl was still a weak mortal.
Now, she's about to have the bearing of a great cultivator.
Are you anxious? As she spoke, Ao Wushuang couldn't help but raise her head. She remembered that she had threatened and tempted Su-chan a few days ago in order to make her cultivate well, but this little girl refused to learn. Now, she regretted it and wanted to learn, didn't she? Ao Wushuang felt proud, as if a surf was singing. She laughed and said, Now you want to learn?
Ha, I won't teach you any more.
Su-chan was so anxious that she quickly pulled Ao Wushuang's arm and shook it hard. Master, you can't do this. I'm your only disciple. How can you watch me become a burden? Ao Wushuang laughed and said, You also know that it's shameful to become a burden? Su-chan smiled apologetically and said, Yes, when the time comes, my disciple will be useless. It won't just be me who will lose face, but also you. Isn't that right, Master? Ao Wushuang squinted at Su-chan and snorted. She wanted to put on airs. Otherwise, if this girl got it too easily, she wouldn't know how to cherish it. Ao Wushuang thought for a moment and said, Su-chan, in fact, when you were young, I did a divination for you. This divination explained your life. When Su-chan heard this, her eyes widened and she quickly asked curiously, What did it say? Tell me quickly. Ao Wushuang said seriously, You have been lonely since you were a child, but your cultivation has been improving since you were young. It wasn't until you were 16 that you met your lover. But after that, it was difficult for you to improve your cultivation and you were laughed at by others. It wasn't until you were 20. When Su-chan heard that she had met her lover at the age of 16, she thought to herself, Isn't that Yundong? Haha, did Master really do a divination, or did she just say it casually? But when she heard that it would be difficult for her cultivation to improve in the future, this sentence immediately touched her sore spot. The little girl suddenly became anxious and hurriedly asked, What about after the age of 20? Can I make great progress after the age of 20? I still have to wait for 4 years?
But Master, what realm will I be in after the age of 20?
Ao Wushuang coughed dryly and said mysteriously, After the age of 20. Su-chan's eyes widened, and her heart thumped wildly. She asked nervously, What about after the age of 20? Can I cultivate to become a 6-tailed fox? Or a 7-tailed fox spirit? Could it be an 8-tailed fox? Ao Wushuang said seriously, after the age of 20. You will slowly get used to being a burden. After that, she couldn't help laughing out loud.
Su Chan was flustered and exasperated.
Master, why are you like this? Ao Wushuang laughed for a while. She held back her laughter, glared at Su Chan, and scolded with a smile. Isn't that so? I've been away for so many days. Have you made any progress in your cultivation? Su Chan seemed to be really a little angry. She jumped out of bed and walked out angrily. As she walked, she muttered, bad master, I hate you, I hate you. You don't even want to teach your own disciple. I hate you so much. When Ao Wushuang saw that Su Chan was about to reach the door, she didn't feel that she was slowing down. She was hesitating and dawdling, and she couldn't help laughing in her heart. Ao Wushuang saw that it was about time, so she said, if you really want to cultivate, you can't give up halfway this time. Otherwise, I won't be polite to you. Su Chan suddenly turned around like a gust of wind and rushed to Ao Wushuang. Her eyes were wide open, and her slender eyelashes were like two small brushes, flickering. Her little head was like a chicken pecking rice, nodding vigorously. Yes, Chaner is the most obedient. Ao Wushuang laughed and said, you are the most disobedient one. Su Chan giggled and shamelessly took Ao Wushuang's arm. She said with a smile, anyway, I'm your only disciple. You can't find anyone else who is more obedient than me, so master, just make do. Ao Wushuang looked at Su Chan with a smile, her eyes full of affection. She stroked Su Chan's hair and said, don't talk about these useless things. Hurry up and sit down to meditate. I want to see how your cultivation is now. As she said this, Su Chan said, oh, and sat down obediently. But as soon as she sat down and her expression had just calmed down, she heard a burst of cheers coming from outside the room. It was the little foxes shouting. Ling Yu's crisp voice was heard, and she said in surprise, Leader, you bought a lot of delicious food today. As soon as Su Chan heard this voice, her eyes, which had just closed, suddenly opened. Her eyes were wide, and her eyeballs were rolling. She raised her head and unconsciously looked out of the door. Her neck was stretched out, and her feet were eager to move. She couldn't wait to rush out to see what delicious food Li Yundong had bought. But as soon as Su Chan moved, she heard Ao Wushuang coughing hard beside her. The little girl turned her head and saw Ao Wushuang looking at her with a frosty face. Her eyes were full of threat, as if she was saying, you dare to go out and try. Su Chan immediately shrank her head and sat down again obediently. But she was a little unwilling, so she muttered in a low voice, can't I go out and take a look? Maybe some of them are for me. Ao Wushuang said angrily, no, cultivators have to be pure and have few desires. How can you cultivate like this? Su Chan shrank her head and said aggrievedly, I was just saying. Ao Wushuang's eyebrows suddenly rose. She couldn't help but say angrily, do you want to annoy me to death? Just now, you said that you would cultivate well, but in less than a minute, you're distracted. Su Chan's face turned red from the scolding. She had no choice but to sit up straight and concentrate on meditating. But no matter how hard she tried, the voices outside the door kept ringing in her ears. They drilled into her head through her ears like quicksilver pouring into the ground. Su Chan could only hear the other little foxes outside the door cheering and shouting, oh, I love this. Don't argue. This is for me. That one is yours. Nonsense. Leader bought this for me. If you don't believe me, you can ask him. Leader, tell me, who on earth did you buy this for? Li Yundong, who was outside the door, was obviously troubled by the harassment. He said loudly, stop arguing. This is for Su Chan, and these are for you. Su Chan immediately opened her eyes again, her face full of surprise. She subconsciously wanted to rush out of the door, but as soon as she moved halfway, her body tilted and she saw a black shadow slap her on the forehead. Su Chan covered her forehead with her hand, only to see Ao Wushuang glaring at her. Evil disciple, how dare you? Su Chan said with a wronged face. Yundong bought something for me. I'll just take a look at it. It won't take long. Ao Wushuang's face was full of anger. Bastard! If you have the guts, say it again. We cultivators pay attention to not changing our expressions even if Mount Tai collapses in front of us. Do you deserve to be called a cultivator like this? Su Chan was startled.
She muttered in a low voice and then closed her eyes.
Maybe there's something for you. After she finished speaking, she still felt itchy in her heart.
The voice outside the door was like 25 little mice roaring in her heart.
The little girl couldn't help opening her eyes again. As soon as she opened her eyes, she saw Ao Wushuang glaring at her like a bodhisattva. Her two willowy eyebrows were raised high. As long as she opened her mouth, she would be beaten violently. Su Chan was startled and didn't dare to speak again.
She said, "Oh," and quickly closed her eyes again.
Seeing that she had finally calmed down, Ao Wushuang snorted. "Can't I control you?" But as soon as she finished speaking, she heard the voice of the little fox outside the door.
"Oh, there's something for Xueqi."
"Yes, little martial uncle, the sect leader bought something for you." There was a lot of noise outside the door, but it was quiet inside the room. Su Chan couldn't help but open one of her eyes quietly, only to see Ao Wushuang glaring at her angrily. For a moment, the two of them stared at each other, speechless. Remember the website. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.